There is a particular kind of silence that exists only in the hours before dawn. Not the silence of emptiness, not the silence that comes when noise has stopped. None. This is something older than that, a silence that has been here since before the first word was ever spoken, before the first fire was ever lit, before anyone thought to name the dark or measure the hours of the night. It is the silence the world rests inside, the way a seed rests inside the earth, still and full and waiting. And tonight, right now, as you settle into wherever you are, as you let your body grow heavy and your breathing slow, you are inside that silence too. You have always been inside it. You simply forgot. And somewhere in the ancient forests of northern India, in a place where the Ganges plain stretched so wide that on clear mornings you could watch the light arrive from the east like a slow tide, a man was already awake. He had been awake for a long time. Not because sleep had abandoned him, not because worry had kept him turning on his mat. He was awake because wakefulness for him was not the opposite of rest. It was the deepest form of it. His name in the language of those who loved him was the Awakened One, the Buddha. And in these hours before the world remembered itself, before the birds called and the cook fire smoked and the children began to stir, he sat in the way he always sat, completely still. Completely present, breathing in, breathing out, not going anywhere, not needing to. You don't have to go anywhere either. Not tonight. There is nowhere you need to be right now. There is nothing you need to solve. Whatever the day carried, whatever weight it pressed into your shoulders, whatever thoughts kept circling, you can set all of it down. This is your permission. You are allowed to rest. Let's go back to that forest. And the grove where the Buddha and his community rested that night was called Jetavana, the Garden of Jeta, near the city of Savatthi in what is now the northern region of India. A wealthy merchant named Anathapindika had purchased it, famously by laying gold coins across the grass until the entire ground was covered. He wanted the Buddha to have it, not for any favor in return, not for any promise, simply because he had heard the teaching once and his life had changed and he did not know how else to say thank you. The garden was large enough that a person could walk for 20 minutes in any direction and still find shade. Mango trees, fig trees, and trees whose names have been lost but whose roots are still somewhere in that soil. There were paths between the dwellings worn smooth by 10,000 footsteps, and at certain hours of the day, the light came through the canopy in long, warm columns, and you could stand inside one of those columns of light and feel for a moment as if the world had arranged itself specifically for you to breathe in. It was in this garden, in the smallest hours of the night, that Ananda sat a few feet from the Buddha and simply kept watch. Ananda was the Buddha's closest companion, his attendant, his shadow, the one who remembered. Ananda had a gift that no one else in the community could quite match. He could hear something once and hold it perfectly inside himself, word for word, the way a still pond holds the reflection of the sky above it without changing a single detail. Decades after the Buddha's passing, when the community gathered to compile every teaching they could remember, it would be Ananda who stood up and began each one with the same 4 words, "Thus have I heard." It was Ananda's memory that kept the Dhamma, the teaching, from dissolving into legend. But tonight, in the dark before dawn, Ananda was not remembering anything. He was simply sitting, watching the shape of the man he loved most in the world breathe in and breathe out, watching the stars through the gaps in the leaves overhead, and listening to the grove settle around him the way old wood settles, small sounds, gentle sounds, the language of something at rest. There is a Pali word, sati, that means mindful presence, awareness that knows what it is doing as it does it, attention that does not slide away toward the past or rush ahead toward the future. The word is sometimes translated as mindfulness in modern usage, but even that translation is only a finger pointing at the moon. What sati actually feels like, according to those who practiced it most deeply, is something closer to what you might experience on the very edge of sleep, that liminal moment when the thinking mind loosens its grip, when your body feels heavy and warm and absolutely here, When you are not asleep but you are not quite awake either, and everything is exactly the right distance away. That is sati. And in that grove before dawn, both the teacher and the student were, each in his own way, inside it. You might find it there too, right now, right where you are, not by trying, never by trying, just by letting the next exhale go a little further than the one before it. The air in Jetavana at this hour smelled of wet earth and night-blooming flowers whose names have also been forgotten. White blossoms that opened only in the dark and closed again at the first touch of morning light, as if they were too shy for the day. Somewhere far off, a river moved through its banks. Somewhere even further, the first suggestion of birdsong was beginning to form in the throat of a bird that would not actually sing for another hour. The night was at its deepest point, the point just before the turning. The Buddha had not always rested this peacefully. There had been years, long, difficult years, when the man who would become the awakened one had pushed his body to extremes that left him barely able to stand. He had believed, not for a time, that the answer to the great human question, the question of suffering, of why we hurt, of whether there was a way through, required complete renunciation, that you had to destroy the body to free the mind. He had sat in the cold until his lips turned blue. He had eaten so little that, and, according to the Buddhacarita, the life story composed by the poet Asvaghosha in the 1st century of the Common Era, his spine became visible through his stomach when he pressed his hand against his abdomen from the front. He nearly died, and the answer did not come. It came later, not through extremity, not through punishment. It came through a kind of relaxed, luminous attention, the same quality you are practicing right now, even if you don't think of it that way. The same quality that makes this particular hour, this quiet, this heaviness in your limbs, this soft blur at the edges of your thoughts, not an obstacle to understanding, but the very door through which understanding enters. One question, though, one question that hovered at the edge of every teaching the Buddha gave, a question that his closest disciples had heard him approach many times but never fully answer. A question that has fascinated scholars and practitioners for 25 centuries. What happens after? What happens when the last breath goes, when the last thought dissolves, when the long dream of a life is finally completely over? The Buddha had a name for those questions. He called them the undeclared. He set them aside again and again, with a patience that sometimes frustrated his disciples to the point of tears. By the end of this night, this long, slow, peaceful night you are walking through, you will understand why. That understanding might be the best thing you carry into sleep, but not yet. First, there is the darkness to rest inside. First, there is Ananda, keeping watch. First, there is the grove, breathing. Let it breathe around you. Let your own chest rise and fall. Let the darkness be what it is. Not frightening, not empty, but full of the same quiet that filled the garden of Jetavana on the morning that this story begins. The stars were beginning, very slowly, to fade. You are still here. Good. Let that settle for a moment. The fact of your own presence, the warmth of wherever you are resting, the sound of your own breath moving in and out. None. You have been in this story from the beginning. You walked into Jetavana before a single bird had called, and now the darkness is shifting, almost imperceptibly the way ink slowly dilutes in water, and around you, a grove is beginning to wake. It begins with sound, always with sound, a sandal scraping gently on a stone path, the wooden hinge of a simple door, the quiet rush of water being poured from a clay vessel. Somewhere in the community of monks who lived in the grove, someone had risen before anyone else, some internal discipline or some natural rhythm of the body pulling them up out of sleep and into the pre-dawn dark, and they were moving, carefully, and with the particular thoughtfulness of someone who does not want to disturb the sleep of anyone nearby. This was the Sangha, the community, one of 3 things the Buddha pointed to again and again when people asked what they most needed on the path. The Buddha himself, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. 3 jewels, he called them. 3 places of refuge. Not refuge the way a bunker is refuge, hiding, fearful, waiting for something to pass. Refuge the way a harbor is refuge. A place where the water grows still enough for the boat to rest. The Sangha in Jetavana numbered several hundred monks and nuns on that particular morning. Some had been with the Buddha for decades. Others had arrived only weeks before, not still adjusting to the rhythm of this life. The early rising, the silent walking, the practice of receiving food rather than purchasing or cooking it, the gradual patient work of unwinding the tangle of their own minds. Ananda was among the most senior. You may not know his name, but his story matters for what you are about to feel. He was one of the first five. One of the 5 ascetics who had practiced alongside the future Buddha during those terrible years of self-mortification. He had watched, with disappointment and then outright rejection, when the young man finally gave up the extreme path and accepted a bowl of milk rice from a young woman named Sujata, who felt, somehow, that this pale, thin wanderer needed feeding. The 5 ascetics had walked away, and he has lost his nerve, they told each other. He has given up. But they were wrong. Weeks later, when the awakened one, newly enlightened, settled into himself in a way none of them had ever seen in a human face, found his way to the deer park at Isipatana near the city of Varanasi. Kundana was the first of the 5 to hear the teaching and understand it. The Pali Canon records the moment with a quiet precision that still moves people who read it today. Something arose in Kundana's mind, clear as a cloudless sky, a recognition, like seeing something you have always known but never had words for. The Buddha looked at him and laughed, the kind of laugh that comes not from amusement but from delight, and said, "Kundana knows. Kundana understands." It was the first moment the Dhamma had been truly received by another human being, and Kundana had carried that moment inside him ever since, not proudly, not as a trophy, but the way you carry warmth after sitting in sunlight, long after you have moved into the shade. Now, decades later, he moved through the pre-dawn grove with the unhurried ease of someone who has stopped fighting time. And his sandals on the stone path made a sound that was almost musical, soft, rhythmic, unhurried. Asaji walked beside him, the youngest of the original 5, the one whose simple, direct account of the Dhamma had once converted an entire household just by the beauty and clarity of the words. Asaji spoke rarely now. He did not need to. When he did speak, people tended to stop what they were doing and listen the way you stop and listen when you suddenly realize the rain has started. And Dana, the practice of generosity, was the first thing many lay supporters of the community thought about when they considered what they offered. But for the monks themselves, Dana had another dimension, the willingness to receive, to walk into a village with an empty bowl and allow others to fill it, to accept what was offered without preference, without complaint, without even the suggestion of wanting something different from what arrived. You can imagine how difficult this was for people who had come from lives of ordinary human wanting. The empty bowl was not just a vessel. It was a practice, a physical, daily, repeated practice in letting the world provide. The Buddha Karita. Asvaghosha's lyrical account of the Buddha's life describes the pre-dawn alms walks with an attention to sensory detail that is almost cinematic. The streets still dark, the monks moving like shadows, their robes the color of saffron, their feet quiet, the smell of cooking fires just beginning to smoke, the village dogs raising their heads at the sound of approaching footsteps, then lowering them again, recognizing these figures, these non-threatening presences, these people who had been passing through without taking anything, without demanding anything for years. You don't have to go anywhere right now. You don't have to move at all. None. But if you let yourself imagine it, if you let your mind follow these sandal sounds down the stone path and out toward the edge of the grove, where the trees thin and the village begins, you might feel something shift in your body. A softening, a release of the particular kind of tension that comes from being always the one who provides, the one who manages, the one who makes things happen. What would it feel like, just for this moment, to walk with an empty bowl and let the world fill it? Kundana knew. He had been practicing that release for longer than some of the younger monks had been alive. And as he walked now through the grove with Asaji at his side, the stars almost fully faded, the first gray light beginning to suggest itself at the eastern edge of the sky, there was nothing on his face but the simple, specific peace of a person who has stopped arguing with the morning. Let that peace find you too. Let it come the way the light was coming, slowly, gently, without insisting. The grove was almost fully awake now. From different directions, the sounds of the Sangha rising and preparing moved through the trees like a quiet tide, a water vessel here, a murmured word there, the shuffle of robes and the careful footsteps of people who had trained themselves over years, moved through the world without crashing into it. And at the center of it all, still as he had been all night, as he so often was, the Buddha sat, eyes open now, watching the light change, ready for the day. Are you ready? There's no hurry. The village isn't going anywhere. The light will arrive whether you rush toward it or simply let it come. Rest here for one more moment, inside the sound of the sandals, inside the last of the darkness, inside the breath that has been carrying you all along. The path from Jetavana to the nearest village was about a mile, and it wound through a stand of trees that opened gradually onto a flat plain where farmers had been working the same soil for generations. Millet, sesame, lentils, the crops of a life that was not easy but was familiar, anchored to the rhythm of monsoon and harvest, and the particular prayer said over the first seeds of a new planting. You are walking that path now. There is no need to hurry, none. The air at this hour carries a particular quality, the coolness of the night still in it, the warmth of the coming day just beginning to breathe at its edges. Your feet on the path make no sound worth noticing. You are simply here, moving, part of the slow procession of saffron-robed figures moving through the early light like pieces of sunrise that have arrived a little early. Rahula was nearby. He had been the Buddha's son before he was the Buddha's student. Born just before the night his father slipped away from the palace to begin the life that would change everything. Rahula had grown up in some ways with two fathers, memory of the prince and the presence of the teacher. He had been ordained young, some accounts say as early as 7 years old, and had grown into a monk of quiet depth, the kind of young person whose stillness you notice before you notice anything else about them. He practiced with a particular intensity that the Buddha himself sometimes gently corrected. Not everything required that much effort. Some things only opened when you relaxed your grip. But this morning, Rahula was simply walking, his bowl in both hands, his eyes toward the path ahead, his breathing, if you watched it, perfectly steady. The Chinese monk Faxian passed through this region in the early 5th century of the Common Era, about 900 years after the events we are describing, and wrote in his record of Buddhist kingdoms about what he found. The grove of Jetavana was still there, though much reduced. The paths the monks had walked were worn so deep into the earth that they could not be mistaken for anything but what they were, the marks of thousands of footsteps, repeated over centuries, by people going toward the village in the morning with empty bowls and returning in the afternoon with full ones. Faxian stood on those paths and understood, without needing anyone to explain it to him, that this kind of repetition, this daily, humble, embodied repetition, was itself a form of teaching. Not in words. In the shape worn into the ground, you have your own worn paths, places you return to again and again, because something there feeds you. A chair by a window, a particular stretch of road, the specific way you make yourself comfortable at the end of a long day, the small rituals that mark the border between effort and rest. These paths matter. They are the shape of your life pressed into the world, and right now, the one you are walking, whether you think of it as a sleep path or a rest path or simply the path from the day into the night, is one worth walking slowly. The village was called Savatthi in the broader sense, though the specific quarter they entered each morning had its own character. Narrower streets, houses closer together, the smell of jasmine from someone's courtyard and the smell of something frying in oil from somewhere down the lane. Dogs, chickens, the first children appearing in doorways, rubbing their eyes, watching the monks pass with the particular unself-consciousness of children who have grown up seeing this and no longer find it remarkable. Visakha was already at her gate, and she was one of the most generous supporters the community had ever known. A woman of considerable means and even more considerable warmth. She had thought carefully about what the community needed. Rain robes for monks who walked in the wet season, medicine for those who were ill, food for those who were visiting from other communities. Not yet knowing the local rounds, Visakha was not performing generosity, and she was practicing it with the same deliberateness that the monks practiced their walking, the same attention that Kundana brought to his breathing. She had understood that dana was not something you did on special occasions. It was a way of moving through the world. She bowed as the line of monks approached. The bowl was lowered. The food, rice, dal, something with turmeric that steamed gently in the cool morning air, was placed inside with care. No words needed. Just the gesture repeated, the gift given without conditions, the gift received without conditions. The Pali word sila means ethical conduct, the ground that makes all other practice possible. Not rules imposed from outside, but the kind of natural care for the world that arises when you stop being so consumed by your own wanting that you forget other people are also here, also hoping, also trying to make it through the day with their dignity intact. Sila shows up in how you receive a gift, in whether you look at the person offering it, in whether you pause for even a moment to acknowledge the life that prepared this food and carried it to the door before the rest of the neighborhood was awake. Rahula looked at Visakha, just that, a meeting of eyes, and something in her face rearranged itself. She smiled. Not the performance of a smile, the thing people produce when they want to signal they are happy. The real thing, the kind that starts somewhere behind the eyes. The line moved on, the bowls were filling. The village was waking up around the slow procession of monks as the sun came fully over the edge of the world and the day declared itself. You can feel it, can't you? Even in the softness of wherever you are right now, that particular light, that particular warmth, that specific quality of an early morning that has not yet been claimed by anything. Before the demands arrive, before the lists begin, right there in the gap between the night and the day, there is a moment that belongs to no one and everyone, a moment you can breathe inside without it meaning anything in particular. The monks completed their rounds. The bowls were full, and the village receded behind them as they turned back toward the grove, walking the same path they had walked out but carrying something different now. Fed, connected, reminded by the simple physical fact of receiving from other hands that no one travels this road alone. The Buddha waited where they had left him, the same posture, the same quality of stillness. But his eyes, when the community returned and settled around him, moved from face to face with a warmth so specific it almost felt like a touch. He saw them, each one. He did not say any of this out loud. He did not need to. He simply waited for everyone to find their place. Then he looked toward the grove, toward the light gathering in the canopy above, and something in the quality of the morning shifted, became more focused, more attentive. A way a room changes when someone who knows what they are doing enters it. Time to eat, and then time to remember something that a young prince once discovered, long ago, under a different kind of tree, at a different time of day, in a moment that started with a breath and ended with everything. You are still here. You haven't gone anywhere. And that is exactly right, because the morning has not gone anywhere either. It is holding still for you, the way mornings sometimes do when you don't rush them, when you let the light come in at its own pace and the warmth arrive on its own terms. The monks have returned to Jetavana with their bowls full. The grove is settling into the particular quiet of a community that has eaten and is now resting in the space between receiving and giving. That soft, grateful interval between being fed and being ready. On the edge of the gathering, Mahapajapati Gotami was seated in the shade of a mango tree. She was, by any measure, an extraordinary woman, though she would have resisted that word. She had been raised in a family of distinction, had married a king, had raised 2 royal children with considerable care and attention, and had then watched as the nephew she had also raised, the son of her sister, a boy born on the very night the stars were said to have gathered in unusual configurations, walked away from everything and became the most significant spiritual figure of the age. She had followed him, eventually, not immediately, not out of blind devotion, but out of something more complicated and more honest than that. She had listened to the teaching, understood it, and wanted to practice it fully, not as a laywoman supporting monks from a comfortable household, as a practitioner herself, with the same commitment, the same discipline, the same access to the deepest levels of the path. The Buddha had not made it easy. There are passages in the Pali Canon where his initial reluctance to ordain women is recorded with a candor that has generated considerable debate across the centuries. Ananda had interceded. He had asked directly, that gentle but persistent way he had. If a woman practiced with full commitment, could she attain the same depth of understanding as a man? The answer was yes. And so the community of nuns, the bhikkhunis, began, and Mahapajapati Gotami became its first member. She had been practicing for many years now. Her face showed it, not in the way that difficulty shows on a face, but in the way that depth does. A kind of face that has stopped needing to perform composure because composure has simply become its natural state. She watched the monks eat with the slightly detached affection of someone who has seen this scene hundreds of times and still finds it each time quietly moving. All these people, young and old, educated and barely literate, from wealthy families and from castes that had given them little, gathered together in the shade of a generous garden, eating rice someone else had cooked, practicing the small discipline of gratitude. The Mahavamsa, the great Sri Lankan chronicle compiled in the 5th century of the Common Era, records the establishment of the Bhikkhuni community as one of the pivotal moments in the early spread of the Dhamma. Without Mahapajapati's persistence, without Ananda's advocacy, without the eventual recognition that the path does not narrow based on the body practicing it, without all of that, the history of Buddhism would be different, not just for women. For everyone who has ever been told that the deepest things were not available to people like them. The Pali word karuna means compassion, but not the soft, slightly sorrowful thing that word sometimes suggests in English. Karuna is active. Karuna goes toward the suffering, not away from it. It is the visceral, empathetic recognition that what hurts another also, in some essential way, touches you. Mahapajapati had spent most of her life practicing karuna, though she would not have named it that during the years she spent it in the ways the world expected of her. Raising her nephew, nursing her sister's children, holding the household together through all the ordinary and extraordinary upheavals that a life in a royal court entails. Now she practiced it differently, with more space around it, with the support of a community that was also, in its own imperfect way, trying to do the same. You know something about karuna, you have felt it, maybe earlier today, maybe earlier this week. That specific ache that opens in your chest when you understand that someone you care about is struggling and you cannot fix it, can only be present for it. That ache is not a problem, It is not a failure of self-control. It is the feeling of your own heart telling you that you are connected, that you are not separate, that what happens to the people around you happens to you too. Let yourself feel that right now if it is present. Not to dwell in it, not to spiral into it, just to acknowledge it, the way Mahapajapati acknowledged it every day, without drama, without resistance, simply noting. Here is the feeling of being alive among other people who are also alive and also finding it difficult and also trying. The meal wound down. Bowls were rinsed at the well. Younger monks collected them. The grove fell into a brief, digestive hush. That pleasant post-meal quiet where the body is occupied with the pleasures of having been fed, and the mind relaxes just slightly from whatever it has been gripping. The Buddha rose. None. He moved without ceremony, just stood, settled his robe, looked briefly at the canopy overhead as if checking the quality of the light. Then he walked at his usual unhurried pace, toward a particular path that led through the grove toward the place the community had come to think of as the teaching ground. Sariputta fell into step beside him. Upali a few paces back, Rahula somewhere in the middle of the gathering, his young face already settling into the focused attention it wore during teachings. Mahapajapati, rising smoothly from her place beneath the mango tree, joined the procession. They moved through the grove in the mid-morning light, motes of dust in the sunbeams, a bird crossing from one tree to another, the sound of the Sangha's footsteps on the dry earth, soft, collective, direct like a river that knows which way it is moving. Something was going to be said today that was worth hearing. You could feel it in the quality of the air, or perhaps you could feel it in the quality of your own attention, that gentle alertness that comes when you are resting and present at the same time, when you have given up the effort of trying and simply allowed whatever is true to be true. That is the best way to receive anything that matters. Not reaching for it, not bracing for it, just open the way a bowl is open, the way the day, when you let it, can sometimes arrive in you like something that was always already there. The place where they gathered had no formal name, but the monks among themselves called it the Rose Apple Shade because of a single jambul tree that stood at one edge of the clearing, old enough that its trunk had grown gnarled in interesting ways, its canopy spreading wide and cool. It was not the most impressive tree in the grove, not the tallest, but there was something about the way its branches arranged themselves overhead that made the light underneath it different from the light everywhere else, dappled, shifting, alive in a way that was easy to sit inside without thinking very much at all. The Buddha had a particular relationship with trees. He had been born under one, a sal tree in a grove called Lumbini, where his mother Mayadevi reached up to hold a branch, and the birth happened there, open to the sky, attended by the forest. He had attained enlightenment under one, the fig tree on the banks of the Niranjan, later known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. He would, decades from now, pass away under two sal trees, their branches meeting overhead to form a natural canopy, their flowers blooming out of season as if the world itself was trying to mark the moment. Trees were not incidental to his story, they were woven through it, and he had said once, in a teaching that Ananda had of course memorized perfectly, that the very first time he had touched something like the peace he would later call enlightenment, the first tiny, incomplete, childlike foretaste of it, had happened under a rose apple tree very much like this one. He had been a child, a young boy at a festival his father the king had organized, a plowing ceremony, a ritual marking of the agricultural year. The adults had been busy with their duties and their pageantry, and the young Siddhartha had wandered away from the noise and sat beneath a rose apple tree and simply breathed. The afternoon had grown warm, the sounds of the festival had grown distant, and nothing dramatic, nothing that would have been legible to anyone watching him from outside, had arisen in his chest. A quality of ease, of being exactly where he was supposed to be, of not needing the moment to be different from what it was. He had been a child, he had not had the language for it, he had not known what to call it, but he had not forgotten it either. And decades later, and after all the searching and the austere practices and the years of sitting and the long process of understanding, after everything, he would sometimes point back to that childhood moment under the rose apple tree as the first hint, the first clue, the first small opening in the wall. Channa was sitting at the back of the gathering that morning. He had a complicated relationship with the community. This Channa, the former charioteer, the man who had driven the young prince out of the palace gates on the night of the great departure, who had held the reins while his master made the choice that would change the world. Channa had eventually joined the Sangha, drawn by the teaching, but he was proud in that specific painful way of a person who was present at a formative moment and cannot quite stop believing that this gives them special standing. He argued, he resisted, he was, as the texts record, with a kind of affectionate weariness, difficult. The Buddha's patience with Channa was notable, not indulgent. He did not excuse the difficult behavior or pretend it was something else, but he did not give up on the man either. There is something instructive in that. If you are someone who has a difficult person in your life right now, or if you are, in some corner of yourself, the difficult person, the teaching does not require you to be easy. It only requires you to stay. The word for impermanence in Pali is anicca, and it is usually introduced as one of the 3 marks of existence, one of the 3 most fundamental observations the Buddha made about the nature of experience. Everything that arises passes away. Everything that is built is subject to decay. Every feeling, good, bad, complicated, is temporary. And every mood that has ever seemed permanent has proven, in time, to be a visitor that eventually leaves. Dukkha is usually translated as suffering, but the Buddha used it more precisely than that. It is the subtle and pervasive sense of friction that comes from expecting the impermanent to be permanent, from trying to hold on to what is already changing, from the gap between what we want the moment to be and what it actually is. He had seen this in himself. He had seen it in his 5 former companions when they looked at him with scorn. He saw it now in the clearing, in the faces of the people gathered here. Some settled, some restless, some fighting the morning stillness, some completely given over to it. He began to speak. His voice in the early accounts is described differently by different people. Some said it was deep and even, like water moving over smooth stone. Others said it was ordinary, surprisingly ordinary, the voice of a man and not a god. What everyone agreed on was that when he spoke, you tended to stop thinking about whether you agreed with him and simply listen. Not because he was commanding, because he was clear, because he said things in a way that made you feel you had always known them and had simply, until this moment, been unable to find the words. There was once a child, he said, who sat under a tree and did nothing at all. And in doing nothing at all, the child found something more valuable than everything in the palace behind him. A pause. The light shifted in the rose apple canopy above. That child did not know what he had found. It would take many years and many miles and a great deal of unnecessary difficulty before he understood what had happened in that afternoon. But the thing itself, the peace itself, was there from the beginning. It did not need to be earned. It was already the nature of the mind when the mind was left just for a moment to be what it is. Channa, at the back of the gathering, was very still. Rahula, at the front, had closed his eyes. You can close yours too, if you haven't already. Or leave them open, it does not matter. What matters is that you are here. What matters is that the thing the Buddha was pointing at, that quality of simple, present ease that the child under the rose apple tree stumbled into without trying, is not something you need to journey somewhere to find. It has not moved. It is here in the breath, in the warmth of where you are, in the weight of your own body settling. It was here before you started listening to this. It will be here after. You did not need to earn tonight either. You simply arrived. That is enough. Still here. You are still here, and so is the morning. Though it is becoming, now, something closer to mid-morning, the light having risen fully and settled into that clear, steady quality it has in the hours before noon when everything is visible but nothing is harsh. The grove of Jetavana had a small lake at its eastern edge, less a lake than a wide, still pond, fed by an underground spring whose source no one had ever located. On summer mornings, the surface held the reflection of the sky so perfectly that it was sometimes difficult, standing at the bank, to know which direction was up. The Buddha walked to the lake after the teaching in the rose apple shade had ended, not abruptly, not because he had finished, but because he moved between spaces the way weather moves, in its own time, following some internal necessity that was not always visible to the people around him. The community followed. This is what they did. This is what communities of practice do. In every tradition across every century, they orbit, they stay near the center of gravity, not because the center commands them to, because the pull is real and they have felt it and they know by now to trust it. Sariputta took a place at the edge of the water, and he was the other chief disciple, the counterpart to Moggallana, the one of whom the Buddha had said that of all his students, none surpassed Sariputta in wisdom. This was not flattery, and Sariputta would not have received it as such. He had a quality that is rare in very intelligent people. He did not mistake being right for having understood. He would hear a teaching and then sit with it for days, turning it in his mind the way a jeweler turns a stone under a loupe, looking not for flaws, but for the depth of what was there. Then he would ask a question, usually a simple one, deceptively simple, the kind that opened like a door and revealed a whole other room behind it. Upali sat nearby, the former barber. The one who had approached the Buddha with no resources except his sincerity, and had been ordained and eventually become the community's greatest expert in the Vinaya, the rules of monastic life, the entire vast and meticulous code of conduct that governed how a bhikkhu moved through the world. Upali knew every rule, and more importantly, he understood why the rules were there, not to constrain, but to protect, and to create the conditions in which the subtler work of the mind could proceed without unnecessary friction. You have someone like that in your life, perhaps. Someone you would not have expected to know well. Someone from a different world or a different generation or a different background. And yet there you are in each other's company, and the distance the world insists on has simply not materialized between you. That is the Sangha principle, even when it appears outside any formal community. The recognition that the thing most essentially true about any human being is not the category they were assigned, but the fact of their presence, their awareness, their capacity to suffer and to understand and to let go. The lake held its reflection of the sky. The Buddha looked at it for a moment before speaking. The way someone looks at something when they are using it not as a sight to see, but as a place to think. There are 4 ways the mind can hold another person, he said, and only one of them is truly stable. And you can hold a person with love, metta, which is the wish that they be happy, offered freely, not because they deserve it and not because they have earned it, but because they are alive, and alive things deserve to be at ease. And you can hold a person with compassion, karuna, which is the specific, directed wish that their suffering ease. You can hold a person with sympathetic joy, mudita, which is the perhaps most difficult one, a capacity to delight in another person's good fortune without any trace of comparison or diminishment. And you can hold a person with equanimity, upekkha, which is the steady, open, unshaken quality of a mind that can be close to someone's joy and suffering without being swept away by either. These 4, the Buddha said, were the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, the 4 ways of being in relationship with the world that the mind, at its most settled and clear, naturally tends toward. He did not offer them as aspirational ideals unreachable by ordinary people. He offered them as descriptions, as reports from the interior of a mind that has relaxed its habitual contracting and allowed its natural warmth to surface. You already know what metta feels like, he said, looking at the lake. You have felt it. The specific tenderness that arises when you look at someone sleeping. A child, perhaps, or someone you love who does not know you are watching. In that moment, before the mind adds any commentary, before any thought about whether they are behaving the way you wish they would behave. In that moment, there is only the wish that they be well, that they be safe, that whatever the day brings them tomorrow, they find their way through it. That is metta. It is not complicated. It does not require practice to feel once. What requires practice is feeling it when it is less easy, when the person is difficult, when the person is you, and The Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang visited this region in the 7th century of the Common Era and recorded, with the careful attention of a scholar who knew that what he was seeing had already become ancient, the ruins of the meditation halls and teaching pavilions near the lake at Jetavana. He described the landscape as still beautiful, still carrying, even in its post-Buddhist quiet, some residue of what had happened here, as if the ground remembered. Sariputta, at the edge of the water, had closed his eyes. Not sleeping. Nothing about his posture suggested sleep. Rather, it was the posture of someone who is listening to something that is not being said out loud, listening to the space around the words. Upali was watching the light on the water with the same patient attention he brought to everything. You can do the same right now. You don't need to be at a lake. You don't need anything except what you have. The breath, the weight of your body, the simple fact of your own awareness resting here. At the end of a long enough day, the warmth of wherever you have landed. The Brahma Viharas are not out there. They are not a destination you travel to. They are a quality of the attention you bring to this moment and then the next one and then the one after that. Not a quality that deepens like a lake deepening the more you allow yourself to be still inside it. Right now, in this moment, not because you have earned it, because you are here, and because you are alive and trying and sometimes exhausted and sometimes confused and sometimes, maybe even tonight, capable of a peace that goes deeper than you expected. You are allowed to rest in that. The lake held its sky. None. The grove breathed around the gathered community, and the Buddha's voice continued, low, unhurried, finding its way into the silences between the listener's thoughts the way water finds its way into the cracks in stone, not forcing, not breaking, only, slowly, over time, going deeper. You are in the deep middle of the day now, and you are also, if you have been following this long, in the deep middle of something else, that particular quality of rest that arrives not at the beginning of a peaceful night, but somewhere inside it. When the first layer of wakefulness has dissolved and the second, deeper layer is starting to reveal itself. When your body has made its decision and is simply carrying it out, and your mind is becoming something softer than it was an hour ago, something less committed to its own definitions. The grove was quiet. After the teaching by the lake, the community had dispersed in the way that gatherings of practiced people disperse, not in a rush, not with the energy of somewhere to get to, but in a gradual, almost tidal recession. A few monks stayed near the water, sitting in the specific way they sat, back straight but not rigid, faces softened, hands resting in laps. Others walked slowly back toward their dwellings, the shade deepening as the sun approached its highest point. The midday heat in this region of India in this season could be extraordinary. The kind of heat that turns the air above a road into something that shimmers and bends, the kind that makes even the most industrious animals slow to a standstill and look for shade. The Sangha had long since made its accommodation with this hour. The midday rest was not laziness, it was ecology. The body's request, not taken seriously. The world's own instruction, delivered by the angle of the sun and the silence of the birds and the way even the leaves stopped moving in the thick, still air of midday. To pause, to give up just for this hour the idea that something useful could or should be happening. Moggallana was the one who most fully inhabited this hour. He was the other chief disciple, the counterpart to Sariputta, the one whose gift was not the analytical clarity of his colleague, but something altogether stranger and more difficult to translate. The ability, according to the tradition, to move his awareness through levels of reality not accessible to ordinary perception. Whether you take these accounts as literal or metaphorical or some third thing that doesn't fit either category, what they point to is undeniable. Moggallana had gone somewhere in his practice that most people had not gone. He had sat down and turned his attention inward and kept going, past the usual stopping points, past the comfortable shallows, into waters that were very deep and very still and very, very quiet. The Pali word samadhi is sometimes translated as concentration, but that translation undersells it the way the word blue undersells the sky at dusk. Samadhi is the quality of a mind so collected, so unified, so completely gathered into this single point of attention that all the usual noise, the planning and worrying and remembering and wishing, falls away the way surface chop falls away when you dive deep enough into water. At a certain depth, the surface is just a rumor. Down here, there is only the dark and the quiet and the sense of something very, very vast. You don't need to dive that deep tonight. You don't need to achieve anything in particular, but you can let yourself go a little further than you usually let yourself go. A little past the first layer of rest, a little past the ordinary thinking about sleep and into the thing itself. Moggallana would say, has said, the texts, that the mind always wants to go there, that the deepest ease is not an achievement but a homecoming, that what feels like effort at the surface becomes effortless as you descend. He was lying down, not sitting, actually lying down, which was unusual enough that it was worth noting. But Moggallana had simply followed the body's request. He had lain down in the shade of a large tree, placed one hand under his cheek, and closed his eyes. And what happened next was not sleep exactly, though it was not sleep either. It was one of those border states, those threshold conditions, where the ordinary division between awake and asleep loses its usefulness and something else, something less categorizable, is what you actually are. You might be approaching that state right now, that softness at the edge of your thoughts, that slight loosening of the boundary between what you are thinking and what is simply arising, that sense that the room around you has become slightly larger than usual, as if the walls have moved back just a few feet to make more room. That is a fine place to be. You are not missing anything by being there. Everything important will wait. The day is over or close to it, and what you did was enough, and who you were was enough, and the fact that you are here, willing to rest, willing to let the world be temporarily managed by someone else, is itself a kind of wisdom that is easy to overlook and worth occasionally naming. Rest here a moment. Let the midday hold you the way it held Moggallana, completely, without judgment, without a destination. The grove breathed. The birds, true to the hour, had gone quiet. Even the Buddha, in his dwelling at the center of the grove, seated in his characteristic posture, as still as the oldest tree, had, for this hour, released the community from the particular kind of presence he usually offered. Midday hour belonged to everyone. It could not be hurried. It could not be productively used. It could only be spent, which is different from wasted. It is the specific spending of what cannot be saved, cannot be stored, can only be given to this moment and then the next. Give this moment your rest. It is asking for it. And you who have come all this way through the long morning, through the alms walk and the teaching and the lakeside quiet, you have more than earned the right to simply lie down under a tree and let the hour be what it is. An hour of nothing in particular, an hour of everything that matters. The grove held the silence, and the silence held you. Somewhere in the shade of an unfamiliar tree, a man was trying very hard to be still and failing repeatedly. His name was Angulimala. His story, though you are about to hear it gently here in the softness of this late day hour, is the most extreme of any person who walked in this grove, extreme in both directions. He had been, before he arrived here, perhaps the most feared individual in the entire region. His name itself was a warning. Angulimala means necklace of fingers. He had worn one. He had killed, the accounts say, many people over the course of what he believed was a spiritual quest, misled by a teacher who had twisted the teaching into something it was not, convinced that a certain number of deaths would bring him the liberation he was seeking. He had believed this. He was not a simple man or a stupid one. He was a man who had trusted the wrong guide and traveled, step by terrible step, into a place from which there seemed to be no road back. The Buddha had walked toward him, not away, toward. And when Angulimala ran at him with his sword and the Buddha did not run, simply kept walking at his own pace, unhurried, as if the violent man were not there. Angulimala had stopped, because how do you chase something that will not acknowledge being chased? How do you frighten something that has no fear? He had stood there with his sword in his hand and stared at the back of this walking man and said, "Stop, stop walking." And the Buddha had said without turning, "I stopped long ago. It is you who have not yet stopped." This is, depending on how you look at it, either a mystical encounter or a very human moment of a deeply unstable person being caught off guard by an unexpected response, and in that gap, that moment of confusion when the usual script was interrupted, managing to hear something he needed to hear. Either way, the result was the same. Angulimala had collapsed, he had wept, he had, in the way of someone who has nothing left to protect, finally been ready to listen. He had been in the community for several years now. The transformation was not simple or complete, and he still struggled with the weight of what he had done. Not with guilt in a way that paralyzed him, but with the specific kind of heaviness that comes from carrying consequences you cannot undo. The Pali Canon records, with unflinching honesty, that even after his ordination, when he walked through villages for alms, people sometimes threw stones, sometimes closed their doors. The past in that community had a long memory. The Buddha's response to this was notable. He did not protect Angulimala from the stones by telling the villagers they were wrong. He said, "Bear it, this is the fruiting of something you planted." Bearing it with patience is itself part of the path. There is a teaching in that which has nothing specifically to do with extreme circumstances, which comes close to home, which might apply to certain things in your own life right now. Consequences you are still carrying, patterns you planted long ago that are still bearing fruit, moments you would undo if you could and can't, and the specific difficult wisdom of simply staying present with the result rather than running from it. The word anatta, no self, is one of the most philosophically complex concepts in the entire Buddhist framework, but it is worth a moment's attention here in the shade with Angulimala because it has a bearing on what he was learning. Anatta does not mean you don't exist. It means that the solid, fixed, and continuous self you tend to believe yourself to be, the essential whoever you are, is not as solid, not as fixed, not as continuous as it seems. What you call yourself is more like a river than a stone. It has direction and character and a kind of identity, but it is made of water, and the water is always moving, and the river you are at this moment is not the river you were 10 years ago and will not be the river you are 10 years from now. For Angulimala, this teaching was, over time, a relief. Man who had done those things was not a stone-carved self that could never be otherwise. He was a river that had found, finally, a different direction. He could not undo the past, but the past was not the entire river. The past was what had happened, and what was happening now, here, in this grove, in this community, in the slow daily practice of eating and walking and sitting and letting the violence of the old life become less defining, was also the river, also him, also real. One of Ashoka's rock edicts, the great Emperor Ashoka, whose conversion to the Dhamma in the 3rd century BCE led him to inscribe the teaching on stone pillars across his entire vast empire, includes a passage about the reformation of those who have committed harm. Ashoka himself had come to the Dhamma after the Battle of Kalinga, a military victory so costly in human lives that the sight of the aftermath had broken something in him permanently. He had looked at what he had done and could not look away. And in the inability to look away, the teaching had found its opening. He had spent the rest of his life building what he called the conquest by Dhamma, the kind of influence that does not require a sword and does not leave bodies in its wake. Angulimala sat in the shade of his unfamiliar tree. His hands, which had once held a sword, were folded in his lap now. He was trying to be still. He was failing, but he was trying again and again. And the trying itself, the return, the again, the willingness to come back to the practice even after the practice has been interrupted by the noise of the mind and the weight of memory, is, the tradition says, the whole thing, not some preliminary exercise before the real thing begins. The return is the practice. Come back, right now, wherever your mind went, however briefly, to the day, to a worry, to a half-formed plan. Come back to this, not to the breath, to the weight of where you are resting, to the grove, and the man in the shade trying again one more time, to simply be still. He is trying, so are you. That is more than enough. And the afternoon light in Jetavana had changed. The sharp, vertical quality of midday had softened into something more horizontal, more golden, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look slightly more than ordinary. That turns a clay water vessel into something you might want to sit and look at for a long time. That makes even the dust motes floating in a shaft through the mango canopy seem worthy of attention. None. Upalavana was at the edge of the grove in a small dwelling separated from the monks' quarters by a thicket of bamboo. She had been sitting for what might have been an hour, or might have been 3. Time in deep practice has a way of becoming irrelevant, not in the sense of being forgotten, but in the sense of ceasing to be a measurement that the mind finds useful. She was, according to the tradition, one of the 2 foremost female disciples of the Buddha, Khema being the other, where Khema's gift was wisdom of the most analytical kind, the kind that could look at a question from every direction and identify, with quiet precision, exactly where the error in the reasoning lay. Upalavana's gift was harder to describe. The tradition speaks of perceptual depth, the ability to see past the surface of things, to apprehend what is present without needing it to declare itself, to understand situations by inhabiting them rather than analyzing them. Intuition, you might call it, if you are willing to use that word without diminishing it. She had a question today, not the kind of question that comes from confusion, but the kind that comes from the very edge of understanding. The last question before understanding completes itself, a question that a mind asks when it has arrived almost somewhere and needs only one more thing to arrive fully. Khema was nearby. The former queen, she had lived before her ordination in the royal household of King Bimbisara, a life of considerable comfort and beauty. She had been, by all accounts, a woman of remarkable beauty who was very aware of that beauty and took no small pleasure in it. No, the Buddha had helped her see through the pleasure and into something more durable underneath it. She had ordained, and the woman who had once been defined in that court by how she looked had become defined in this community by how she thought, by the precision and spaciousness of her understanding. The text known as the Milinda Panha, the questions of King Milinda, a fascinating dialogue between a Greek king and the monk Nagasena, contains a section that relates indirectly to the question Upalavana was about to ask. Nagasena describes the nature of understanding as being like a lamp lit from another lamp. The second flame is new and distinct, yet the fire has been transmitted. Nothing physical moved from one lamp to the other, and yet something real passed between them. Upalavana asked her question quietly, without preamble, the way someone asks a question they have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided to simply put down. If everything that arises passes, if no state is permanent, not even the most peaceful, then what is it that understands this? What is the part of the mind that sees the impermanence? Does that also pass? It is a beautiful question. You don't need to answer it tonight. You don't need to have it resolved before you can rest. But you can let it sit with you, lightly, the way a question sits in the mind when you have decided not to force it, when you have set it down in a comfortable place and decided to let the understanding come in its own time, like fruit ripening. And the Pali word panna, wisdom, does not mean the accumulation of correct information. It means seeing things as they actually are, without the distortion of wanting them to be different, without the interference of self-interest in the perceiving. It is the clarity that arrives not through thinking harder, but through allowing the thinking to settle and looking at what remains when the noise of the mind goes quiet. Naupeka, equanimity. is the quality that makes Pana possible. The steadiness that neither clings to pleasant experience nor recoils from unpleasant. That allows the whole range of what arises to arise without the exhausting business of constant management. You have felt some version of this, perhaps, moments of genuine tiredness. Not the frantic exhaustion that creates its own noise, but the deep exhaustion at the end of something truly complete, when the body has used what it had and the mind, for once, does not resist the fact of that. That is close to upekkha. Not the same thing, but close. Hema looked at her colleague for a moment before speaking. Then she said, with the specific gentleness of someone who knows they are about to say something true, "The part of the mind that sees impermanence is also impermanent. But in the seeing, there is something that does not grasp, and in the not grasping there is something, perhaps you could call it rest, that does not depend on conditions." The afternoon light moved through the bamboo thicket. A bird, somewhere in the canopy above, called once and then was silent. Upalavana sat with that for a long time. You can too. There is no hurry. The answer to the deepest question is not one that arrives in a rush. It settles slowly, like sediment in water, once the water has stopped being stirred. And you right now are the water that has stopped being stirred. Let what needs to settle, settle. The grove held you, the afternoon held you. The long, soft, generous arc of this particular day was moving very gradually toward its evening, and the evening when it came would be worth being awake for. Just barely awake, just enough. You might feel it in your body, this hour. That slight, particular shift that happens as the day begins its tilting. The light going from gold to something deeper, the air carrying the first suggestion of evening coolness beneath the residual warmth of the afternoon. The sense, even here inside this resting place, even in the soft unreality of this long meandering evening, that the day has been and now is passing and the night is preparing to arrive. The Buddha walked at this hour, not for any destination, not with any agenda, and he walked because the body that carried him had been sitting for most of the day and needed simply to move, and because the quality of the late afternoon, that particular light, that particular temperature, was, he had found, good for a certain kind of reflection, not the effortful kind, the effortless kind, the kind that happens when the feet are moving and the eyes are taking in the world and the thinking mind is occupied just enough by the small navigations of walking that the deeper mind can do what it does best, which is simply to be. King Pasenadi joined him. This was not unusual. Pasenadi was the king of Kosala, a powerful man by any worldly measure, ruler of one of the great kingdoms of the age, possessor of armies and treasuries and the kind of influence that people spend entire lives pursuing. He also visited the grove regularly. He had a complicated relationship with the teaching. He understood a great deal of it. He admired the Buddha genuinely. He tried in his own way to apply what he heard to the enormous practical problems of governing a kingdom. And he regularly, somewhat pitifully, the texts are affectionate about this, failed to live up to his own understanding. He overate, he indulged, he sometimes made decisions he knew to be wrong for reasons he knew to be unworthy. He was, in other words, deeply recognizable, a person trying to be better than his appetites and not always succeeding. The Buddha did not lecture him. He walked beside him. He asked questions. He listened to the king describe his troubles with a quality of attention that, Pasenadi later said, made him feel for the duration of the conversation that his troubles were neither too small to be worth mentioning nor too large to be workable. He felt beside this man exactly the right size. You might know that feeling. The specific relief of being in the presence of someone who can hold the full complexity of what you are going through without simplifying it and without being overwhelmed by it. Someone who does not need your situation to be tidier than it is in order to stay in the conversation. That is a rare thing and worth noticing when you find it. A path wound through the grove and out to its northern edge where the trees thinned and the flat plain opened and the sunset was beginning to assemble itself in the west with the casual magnificence of something that happens every day and nevertheless remains. Every day somehow astonishing. Anicca. Impermanence. The Buddha had spoken of it in the morning. Here it was in the sky, the changing colors, the movement of light through cloud, the way the horizon was transforming with every breath into something slightly different from what it had been one breath before. Nothing holding still, everything becoming. A sunset, not a thing that was happening to a fixed background, but the whole sky being right now this specific unrepeatable configuration of light and cloud and color that would never exist again in quite this form. You have seen enough sunsets to know this without needing anyone to point it out. Every one you have ever seen has been in its way a lesson in impermanence delivered by the sky with more grace than any text could manage. Yet, here is the thing, the fact that the sunset is impermanent does not make it less beautiful. It makes it more so. A moment of real peace matters more because you know it will shift. You know, and knowing, you let yourself be in it completely. Let yourself be in this. King Pasenadi had stopped talking. Something in his face let go, the particular softening that happens to a person who has been tightly wound for a long time and has, and for just this moment, forgotten to be. He looked at the sunset and he was simply a man looking at a sunset and nothing about him required management or improvement. The Buddha walked beside him in silence, not the silence of having nothing to say, the silence of someone who knows that the sunset is saying it better. Be grateful for it if you can manage it. The breath, the night that is coming, a fact that rest exists, that after everything the day required, the world has arranged for an ending. Every day ends. Every effort eventually puts itself down. Every person who has been holding something eventually gets to set it down for the night at least and breathe. Pasenadi looked at the sunset, stopped talking. Something in his face let go. The Buddha walked. The evening came, and somewhere in the grove behind them, the lamps were being lit one by one, small flames appearing in the dark of the community's dwellings, warm and steady and exactly the right amount of light for what comes next. The evening in Jetavana had settled into itself the way evenings do when they are allowed to. Gradually, without hurry, one quality of light dissolving into the next until there was no longer any clear border between dusk and dark, just the soft arrival of night and the small scattered lights of the lamps and the fires that marked the dwellings of the community like a constellation that had chosen for this night to land in this particular grove. The community gathered once more. Not with the urgency of morning or the focused attentiveness of the mid-morning teaching, but with the slower, warmer quality of an evening assembly. People arriving in ones and twos, finding places to sit, settling more deeply into their bodies than they had been all day. The air smelled of wood smoke and the particular nighttime scent of the grove. Something resinous and cool beginning to rise from the soil as the heat of the day released. Mahapajapati was seated near the central fire. He was, of all the senior disciples, perhaps the most austere, the one who had chosen to live not in the relative comfort of the grove's permanent dwellings, but in the forest, under trees, sleeping on the ground, owning almost nothing. He had been, before his encounter with the teaching, a man of considerable wealth and position, married to a woman named Bada Kapilani, who was his match in intelligence and eventually became his colleague in ordination. He had looked at everything he owned, everything he had accumulated, everything that the world considered the markers of a successful life, and had understood, with the specific clarity that the teaching can produce, that none of it was the thing he was actually looking for. He had given it away, not resentfully. With the specific relief of someone who has been carrying a heavy bag for a long time and has finally been shown that they were allowed to put it down. He sat now in the firelight with the relaxed dignity of someone who has long since ceased to need anything from the world in order to feel at ease inside it. His face in the fire's light was striking. Not young, not soft, but alive in the specific way that faces are alive when they have been genuinely fully used. Ambapali was also present tonight. She was a lay supporter of the community, a woman of complex history, celebrated in the texts with a frankness that is, in its own way, remarkable for the period. She had heard the Buddha teach, had offered him and the community a meal, one of the most generous offerings in the tradition's recorded history, and had subsequently devoted her life to practice. And her own verses appear in the Therigatha, the verses of the elder nuns, one of the oldest collections of poetry composed by women anywhere in the world. Poems that describe with luminous honesty the experience of aging and the specific liberation that came from understanding impermanence not as an idea but as something she had watched happen in her own life over time. Ambapali watched the fire. You can watch it too. Even if you are somewhere far from any fire, you can let the image arrive. A fire in a grove at night, its light unsteady and warm, the faces of the people gathered around it illuminated from below so that their features seem rearranged into something more primal, more essential. There is a quality of mind, the Buddha said into the firelit dark, that can hold everything that arises. Joy, grief, difficulty, ease, without being destroyed by any of it. The Pali word is mudita, often translated as sympathetic joy, the ability to take genuine pleasure in the good fortune of others. But it points to something larger than that translation suggests. It points to a fundamental generosity of the spirit, a willingness to be glad that things are as good as they are, wherever and for whomever they are good. Not a kind of radical non-jealousy, not just of other people's possessions or achievements, but of their moments of genuine peace and happiness. He paused. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the dark beyond the grove, a night bird called. You have all practiced dana, the generosity of giving. You have given food, given shelter, given teaching, given time. But mudita asks for something subtler. It asks that you practice the generosity of being glad. That when you see another person resting in some version of what you are practicing here, even if they have arrived at it through a path you did not take, even if they do not have the language you have, even if the peace they have found looks entirely different from yours, you let yourself be glad for them. Not comparing, not measuring, simply glad. Mahakassapa was very still by the fire. Then he said, very quietly, that is the hardest one. And the Buddha looked at him with something that was not quite a smile but contained everything a smile contains, and said, yes, the nibbana, the Pali word for the deepest liberation, the complete release from the cycle of conditioned existence, is not, the tradition insists, a state of blank nothingness. The word itself is often translated as extinguishing, like a flame going out. But the tradition is careful to clarify. What is extinguished is not the mind, not awareness, not the capacity to love. What is extinguished is the burning, the friction. No. The craving and the aversion that keep the ordinary mind always in a state of low-level combustion, always wanting something other than what is here, always pushing away something that is arriving. When the burning goes out, what is left is not nothing. The texts resist describing it, wisely, because language which was built to describe conditioned things does not have good tools for the unconditioned. But they occasionally use words like cool, upstill, vast, free. One of Ashoka's rock edicts describes the spirit of the teaching with a simplicity that the more elaborate philosophical texts sometimes lose. This is good, the inscription says in substance. Listen to the teaching, to practice it, to support those who practice it. By doing these things, both this life is made fortunate and the lives that follow. Ashoka understood that you did not have to fully understand Nibbana to move toward it. You simply had to move, simply had to practice. The understanding would come, or it would come to those who came after you, or it would unfold across more time than any single life contains. None of that made the moving less worthwhile. The fire burned lower. The night deepened around the community. The stars above the grove were remarkable. No city lights, no ambient glow, just the full dark sky and the full array of stars in the Milky Way, laid across it like a river of light that made the fire below seem for a moment necessary. You don't have to stay awake for the ending of the fire. You are not required to watch it go out. If sleep is coming, if it is already arriving at the edges of your attention, already softening the sound of the words into something more like texture than content, let it come. The grove will still be here, the teaching will still be here, the fire will take care of itself. Rest if you need to rest. This is a kind night. It will hold you. If you are still here, still following, still moving through this long and quiet night, you are somewhere in the deep territory now. The place where the day has fully released you and the night has fully taken you in, where your thoughts, if they are still moving, are moving more slowly, with less certainty about where they are going, more willing to simply drift and turn. This is good. This is right. This is exactly where you were always going. The fire in the grove had burned to its low stage, not out, not dying, but subsided into a bed of coals that glowed a steady red-orange, reliable and warm and requiring nothing more to be what it was. Around it, the community was settling into the various arrangements of sleep. Some in their dwellings, some on mats under trees, a few simply sitting in the way they sat, awake but deeply interior. Impossible to tell by looking at them whether they were practicing or resting or doing something that contained both. Nagasena had found a place slightly apart from the others. He would, in his later years, become famous for the conversations recorded in the Milinda Panha, the extraordinary dialogue with King Milinda that took place perhaps a century and a half after the events of this story, a text in which a sharp, skeptical, philosophically trained Hellenistic ruler encounters a Buddhist monk of equal sharpness, and they argue respectfully and at length about the hardest questions the teaching poses. What is the self? If everything is impermanent, what is it that moves from life to life? Is Nibbana a place you go, or a quality of experience, or something neither? Nagasena handles every question with the specific confidence of someone who has thought these things through to their depth and is not afraid of the asking. But tonight he was young, and the king had not yet come, and the conversations had not yet happened. Tonight he was simply a monk in the dark watching the coals. The Pali word uposatha refers to the observance days in the Buddhist calendar, days of particular practice and reflection, days when the community gathers to recite the code of conduct and recommit to the path. But in the broader and more personal sense, uposatha points to the practice of stopping, of setting aside, on a regular basis, the ordinary momentum of accumulation and striving, and simply resting in what is. The uposatha spirit is the same spirit you are practicing right now. Not an extraordinary retreat, not an achievement, a return. A regular, committed, unhurried return to the simplest version of what you are. A breathing creature in a temporary form, resting in a particular place, alive in this specific night which will not come again. Now, the Milindapanha has a passage, one that Nagasena perhaps remembered on nights like this one, in which the king asks whether a person who has never met the Buddha can still benefit from his teaching. And Nagasena answers with characteristic precision. A lamp lit from another lamp across a great distance still carries fire. The teacher does not need to be present for the transmission to be real. You have received something tonight, perhaps, not because anyone has told you what to believe, but because you have sat inside the quality of these hours and let them do what hours of genuine peace do when you stop filling them with noise. That is the transmission, not from the outside in, from the inside out, the recognition of something that was always already there, pointed to by a story, by a voice, by the particular quality of a night that has been moving towards sleep long enough that the sleep is no longer far away. Coals pulsed with their low, steady heat. Nagasena watched them for a while. Then he lay down on his mat, pulled his robe around himself against the night air, and closed his eyes. Not because practice was over, because rest is also practice, because the body that carries the mind needs tending. Because the morning would come, and the morning would have its own requirements. The alms round, the teaching, 1,000 small opportunities to practice kindness and attention and generosity that a day in the Sangha provides. And for any of that to be possible, this quiet undoing of the day had to happen first. The fire grew lower still. The grove breathed around it. Trees breathing out what they had made from the day's light. The soil breathing the cool night air back into itself. The whole living system performing its evening exchange. You are part of that exchange right now. Your body cooling slightly, your breathing deepening, your muscles releasing the small accumulated contracts of the day one by one like knots gently loosened by warm water. Let the knots loosen. You don't need to do it consciously. You don't need to inventory each one. Just breathe out. Let the exhale go a little further than you would have let it go an hour ago. Let the next one go further still. The body knows how to do this. It has been doing it every night of your life. You only need to stop preventing it. This is the deepest rest. Not the absence of awareness, but the presence of awareness that is no longer trying to control anything. Awareness that is simply here, simple and open. The way water is simply water. The coals glowed on, the monk slept. The night continued its long, generous work. Now the grove was almost entirely quiet. The small night sounds remained, a cricket somewhere in the grass, the occasional creak of a branch settling, the soft percussion of a moth finding its way through the dark. These sounds were not interruptions into the silence. They were the texture of it, the way the silence made itself known. And in that textured quiet, something that had no name was present, something that had been present all day, through all the walking and the teaching and the eating and the sitting, something that had simply been waiting for the noise to quiet down enough that you could feel it. You can feel it now. Just barely, at the edge of whatever thinking remains, a kind of openness, a kind of warmth that does not come from any particular source, a kind of belonging that does not require you to have done anything to deserve it. Rest inside that. You have come a long way tonight, Ananda. From the darkness before dawn in the grove of Jetavana, through the sound of the first sandals on the morning path, through the village at first light and the meal received with gratitude, through the rose-apple shade and the teaching by the lake, through the midday quiet and the afternoon's difficult peace, through the sunset with king and the firelight and the deep hour of Nagasena at the coals, and you have walked the whole day alongside the Buddha and his community, and now the night has come fully into itself, and the grove is as quiet as it will ever be. Still are here, perhaps surprised to still be here, perhaps already half dissolved into the sleep that has been waiting patiently for you since the beginning. The breath is still moving, in, out, without your help, without your management, without your permission, even. It just goes on doing what it does, this generous automatic miracle, this thing that began on the day you arrived in the world and will end on the day you leave it, and in between has never once asked you to be grateful for it. Not be grateful for it, not in an effortful way, not in a way that requires you to produce some feeling you don't currently have. Just notice it. The way it is here, the way it will be here when you are asleep, not carrying you through the night the way the river carries the boat. The river does not ask the boat to help. The river simply moves. You are the boat tonight. There is one question the Buddha never answered directly, and you remember it from the very beginning of this long night, planted there at the edge of the first chapter, before the birds had called and before the village had woken and before any of the teaching had begun. What happens after? What happens when the last breath goes? Is there something, anything that persists? The Buddha called this question undeclared, not because he did not know. The tradition suggests he knew very well. No, he declined to answer because the question, in the form in which it was almost always asked, contained a hidden assumption that the teaching was specifically trying to undo. The assumption that there is a solid, non-fixed self that either continues or does not continue. The assumption that you are the kind of thing that has a clear, final answer in that direction. But what if you are not that kind of thing? What if you are instead not what the teaching says you are? A dynamic, flowing, impermanent, luminous process. Not a noun but a verb, not a lamp but the light the lamp produces, none, which moves outward without boundary and does not stop when the lamp is extinguished. It simply stops being visible in that form and continues in whatever form energy continues. The question what happens after is, in some sense, the question of someone who believes they are a stone that either persists or crumbles. The teaching suggests you were never a stone, you were always a river, and rivers do not end. They change, they divide, they reach the sea, they become the sea, and the sea becomes the rain, and the rain becomes the river again. There is no moment that is simply over. There is only transformation. And tonight, right now, you are transforming from awake to asleep on. From the managed, effortful, storytelling version of yourself that navigated the day into something quieter and wider. The boundary is not a wall, it is more like the shore, the place where one thing becomes another without either one disappearing. You are at the shore. There are 3 things worth carrying into sleep tonight. 3 things from this long day in the grove, from this walk alongside people who spent their lives learning how to be present in exactly the way you are being present right now. The first is this: you do not have to earn rest. Rest is not a reward for a day well managed or a task well completed. It is the nature of things. The world built sleep into the design not as a consolation prize, but as a central feature. Every creature that experiences time experiences rest as the other half of effort. You are not taking something you don't deserve. You are receiving something that was always meant for you. The second is this: you are not alone, even when you are alone. The Sangha, the community, does not require you to be in the same room as other practitioners. The quality of attention that filled the grove of Jetavana, that moved through the morning alms walk and the rose apple teaching and the lake discourse and the firelight evening, that quality is not limited to any single place or time. None. It arises wherever someone stops and breathes and pays attention. It arises in you right now. In whatever small or large way you have allowed the night to slow you down, you are part of a community that spans 25 centuries, and you are not sitting in this night alone. The third thing, the one that carries the most weight, the one that stays longest, the one that the Buddha returned to again and again across a teaching life of decades, is the simplest. Everything changes. This difficulty you are carrying will change. This goodness you have found will change into the next form of goodness. The night will change into morning. The morning will change into the day you haven't lived yet. The breath going out will change into the breath coming in, anicca, impermanence, not as a tragedy, as the very mechanism of life. The fact that nothing stays the same is not something to resist. It is the proof that things can get better. It is the guarantee that whatever is hard right now is not permanent. It is the most honest and the most hopeful thing the teaching has to offer. Let that land for a moment. Let it go wherever it needs to go. The grove of Jetavana is very quiet now. The coals have gone out. The stars above the canopy are beginning, almost impossibly slowly, almost below the threshold of perception, to move toward the west, as they always do, as they will do all night, as the earth turns through the dark and carries all of us. The grove and the monks and the ancient teaching and your breathing body in its resting place, through this particular night and toward the particular morning waiting on the other side. Ananda is still there, somewhere in the dark, still keeping watch, still holding the night with the same quality of attention he has always brought to it. Complete, gentle, undemanding. The way a good companion keeps watch, not asking you to be awake, not asking you to perform your gratitude or explain your peace. Simply present, simply glad that you are resting. The Buddha is breathing, you are breathing. In, out, in. The breath is the teaching. The breath is the teacher. The breath has been here inside you this entire day, this entire life. Patient beyond any patience you have ever managed. Arising, passing, reliable as any river, as any tide, as any light returning after any dark. Follow the breath down now. past the surface, past the first layer, past the thinking and the remembering and the planning and the reviewing, not past the place where the words stop being words and become only sound and then only warmth and then only the faintest suggestion of being here at all. Kusala, the Pali word for wholesome, for that which leads toward well-being and clarity, for the actions and qualities of mind that build the conditions for peace. Kusala accumulates in ways you cannot always see. Every moment of genuine rest is kusala, every breath taken with even a flicker of presence. Every time you have set down a weight you didn't need to carry, even briefly. Every time you have been for a moment simply where you are, you have been building something tonight, on slowly, without effort, simply by being willing to follow this voice through this grove, through this long and gentle day. Whatever you carry into sleep, it will include this. The memory of the grove at night, memory of the breath, the memory that somewhere in a garden made of generosity and lit by firelight, a community of imperfect and devoted people found again and again, the simple and radical practice of simply being here. I'll be here now, just this breath, just this warmth, just this moment dissolving into the next, just this, the grove breathes, you breathe, and somewhere in the oldest forest of the world, a man who stopped arguing with reality a long, long time ago breathes alongside you, and the night holds you both, and the stars continue their patient arc, and the morning is already somewhere on its way unhurried, knowing you will be ready when it arrives. Sleep well, and you have walked far enough today. The night has a quality that changes depending on where you are inside it. There is the first darkness, the one that arrives at dusk, still holding the warmth of the day in its lower layers, still smelling of the afternoon's heat releasing from stone and soil. There is the middle darkness, the one you are in now, or close to it, the hour when the temperature has bottomed out and the world has given up all its daytime warmth and the air carries only the cool, clean smell of actual night. And there is the last darkness, the one that comes in the hours before dawn, when the body's temperature begins to rise again in preparation for waking, when dreams become more vivid and more strange, and when the border between sleep and waking grows thin in a different way than it does at the beginning of the night. You are somewhere in the middle now, in the second watch, as the ancient tradition called it, on. The monks who kept the discipline of night practice divided the dark into 3 watches, and the second was considered the most valuable, the deepest, the most still, the most available for the kind of practice that requires the ordinary mind to have exhausted itself first. The second watch of the night was when the real work happened, when the layers had peeled back far enough that what was underneath could be seen. You are not being asked to do any work right now. Let that be clear. The work, whatever it was, is finished for today. What the second watch offers is not effort but reception. The particular receptivity of a mind that has been busy all day and has finally, in the accumulated quiet of these hours, stopped being busy. A mind that is empty enough to hold something it could not have held at noon. What does it hold? Nothing you can name while it is happening. Only afterward, in the morning, in the first moments of waking, that brief window before the day's agenda reasserts itself, do people sometimes notice that something has shifted, that a problem which seemed intractable the night before has overnight revealed a seam, that a grief which was pressing has settled slightly, not resolved but become more bearable, that a question which had been tight and urgent has relaxed into something more open, more patient, more willing to wait for an answer that comes in its own time. This is what the night does. This is what sleep does, not as metaphor, as biology, as neuroscience, as something the wisest humans in every culture have understood long before anyone had words like neuroscience to describe it. The sleeping mind consolidates, integrates, clears. It takes the raw material of the day and does something with it that the waking mind cannot do, because the waking mind is too busy managing the present to process the past. In the grove of Jetavana, the second watch of this particular night, there was a monk named Kumara who could not sleep. Not Angulimala, not Nagasena, not any of the names you have heard tonight. This was Kumara, a younger monk whose name does not appear in the great texts, who has been forgotten by history the way most people are forgotten by history, which is to say, completely and without any injustice in the forgetting. He was 23 years old. He had been in the community for 2 years. He had come from a merchant family in Savathi, drawn to the teaching by something he could not quite articulate, a sense persistent and nagging that the life his family expected him to live was not the only life available, and that somewhere in some direction there was a different way of being in the world that had more of whatever it was he was looking for. He had found the community, he had found the teaching, he had found in the daily practice of the monastic life something genuine and nourishing, the early rising, the walking, the sitting, the slow and patient work of watching his own mind without identifying with everything it produced. He had made real progress. His senior monks told him so, and they were not given to flattery. And yet tonight, in the second watch, he could not sleep, because a thought had arrived that he could not set down. The thought was this: what if I am wasting my time? Not in the way a person wastes time when they are doing something trivial instead of something important. The reverse. What if the very act of prioritizing this, the practice, the sitting, and the slow inner work, was itself a kind of avoidance? What if his family needed him? What if there were things he could do in the world, practical things, things that would make a measurable difference to people who were suffering, and instead he was here in this grove, watching his breath? You might recognize this thought, not its specific form, the details are his, but the quality of it, a specific anxiety of someone who is genuinely trying to do something meaningful and has, in the quiet of the night, been ambushed by the question of whether they are trying in the right direction, whether the effort is being applied where it matters, whether the life they are living is, in some fundamental sense, the life they are supposed to be living. Kumara lay on his mat and turned this thought over in his mind. He could feel his heartbeat slightly elevated. He could feel the tightness in his chest that thoughts like this one produce. He could feel the pull to sit up, to think it through more rigorously, to resolve it before morning. He did not sit up. Something held him down, not force, not resolution, but a kind of tiredness that was wiser than the anxious energy wanting to take over. His body simply would not cooperate with the urgency the thought was trying to generate. And in that gap, in the space between the thought's demand and the body's refusal, something else entered. Not an answer, not a counter-argument, just a quality of presence, the sound of the grove at night, the temperature of the air, the weight of his own body against the mat, the breath continuing without his involvement. The thought was still there, and it had not been resolved, but it had somehow shrunk, not dismissed, not suppressed, but placed in its proper proportion against the vast, unconcerned, entirely unhurried fact of the night continuing around it. Night did not care about the thought. The night was not worried. The night was simply doing what the night does, which is to hold everything, the worry and the question and the uncertain young monk and the sleeping elder monks and the embers of the fire and the stars and the trees, with the same complete, non-preferential, entirely adequate attention. Kumara felt his heartbeat slow. He felt the tightness in his chest ease, not because the question had been answered, but because the question had been, for now, for tonight, set down, not thrown away, and set down. The way you set down something heavy when your arms have finally had enough, with the full understanding that you will pick it up again tomorrow, not also with the equally full understanding that you do not need to hold it while you are sleeping. You can set down whatever you are holding too, right now, not forever, just for tonight. The question will be there in the morning. The problem will be there in the morning. The thing you are trying to figure out will be there, patient and unchanged. When you wake up, it does not require your attention while you sleep. It does not need to be solved tonight. The morning will come, and you will pick it back up, and perhaps something in the sleep will have helped you in some way you cannot predict or control. Carry it differently. Set it down. The grove holds it. The night holds it. You don't have to. Kumara slept. The second watch continued. The stars moved their slow, reliable arc, and in the center of the grove, in his own small dwelling, the Buddha sat in what his disciples sometimes called the lion's posture. Still, upright, completely at ease, completely awake, completely and eternally at home in whatever moment he happened to be in. He was not thinking about Kumara. He was not monitoring the community. He was not planning tomorrow's teaching or reviewing today's. He was simply sitting in the dark, breathing. The way a tree is simply a tree, the way water is simply water, the way the night is simply the night, complete, not lacking, not needing to be anything other than what it already is. That is the model, not the impossible version of it, not the enlightened master who has transcended ordinary human life, but the principle of it, the practice of it, the small, daily, repeated, imperfect attempt at it, to be as completely as you can manage. Exactly here. To find that exactly here is perhaps exactly enough. There is a teaching the Buddha gave, late in his life, to a group of monks who had been asking, with a persistence he found both touching and slightly exhausting, about the nature of consciousness after death. He had declined to answer, as he always declined to answer that specific form of the question, and one of the younger monks, frustrated, had finally asked, "But why? Why won't you tell us? What is the harm in simply saying what you know?" And the Buddha had looked at the young monk with the affectionate patience of someone who has answered a version of this question many times and has learned that the answer is not the thing the questioner actually needs. And he had said something like this: suppose a man is shot with a poisoned arrow. His friends carry him to a physician, and the man says, "I will not let this arrow be removed until I know the name of the man who shot me. I will not let it be removed until I know what clan he belongs to, how tall he is, what kind of bow he used, what kind of string, what kind of arrow." And while the man is asking these questions, the poison moves through his blood and the man dies. The teaching I give, the Buddha said, is aimed at this, at removing the arrow, at reducing the suffering that is happening right now, in this life, in this mind, in this body. The questions about what comes after are interesting questions. They are not, however, the arrow. And while you are busy asking them, the arrow remains. You might find this unsatisfying even now, even in the deep quiet of this night, even with sleep pulling at the edges of your awareness. You might want to know. Most people do. The wanting to know is not a flaw. It is one of the most essentially human things about you. The drive to understand, to make sense of the boundaries of existence, to find some framework that can hold the incomprehensible fact of finitude. But the arrow is still in you, and the physician is here, and the medicine is the breath. The breath that is happening right now, the one moving in, the one moving out, the one that has never once failed you, not in any night of your life, not in any sleep, not in any moment of fear or exhaustion or illness or grief when you thought you might not be able to go on. The breath went on. It always went on. Not because it is magical, because it is what life does. Life breathes. And as long as you are breathing, you are alive. And as long as you are alive, there is still time. Time for the next breath, time for the next morning, time for whatever the teaching, in whatever form it finds you, is trying to give you access to. Tonight it is finding you here, in this particular darkness, in the specific warmth of wherever your body is resting. No, in the weight of your limbs and the particular quality of your breathing in this moment, which is different from how you were breathing an hour ago, and will be different again in an hour's time. This moment, exactly this one, the one you are in right now, the only one actually that exists. The past being memory and the future being imagination, and this, right here, being the only place where life is actually occurring. Be here. Just here. The river is flowing. You are the river. You do not need to understand where rivers go in order to be the river. You simply need to flow. In the grove, night was approaching its deepest point. That hour between 2 and 4 in the morning when the human body temperature is at its lowest, when sleep is at its most dense and dreamless. No, when the unconscious does whatever the unconscious does in the absolute dark of the organism's deepest rest. Even those monks who were sitting in meditation had, most of them, allowed the posture to hold them, rather than holding the posture themselves. They were resting inside awareness rather than maintaining it by effort. The distinction is subtle but important. It is the difference between holding your breath and simply breathing. One is effortful. The other is what happens when you stop interfering. Stop interfering if you can. Just for these next few minutes. Just for the next breath. Stop trying to make the sleep arrive and let it arrive on its own terms. Stop checking whether you are relaxed and simply let the body do what it knows how to do. Stop listening to these words as if they are something you need to evaluate and simply let them wash over you the way the night air washes over everything. Impartially, completely, without any special attention to whether you deserve it. You are part of the grove tonight. You are part of the dark and the quiet and the slow breathing of everything that is alive in this night. The trees are breathing. The soil is breathing. The water in the underground spring that feeds the lake is moving through its dark channels, unhurried, going where it is going. The stars are doing what stars do, burning, or in some cases no longer burning, though the light has not yet had time to stop arriving. So from here they look the same as they ever did. Everything is doing what it does. The world is running itself without your help, as it has always run itself, as it will continue to run itself through the rest of this night and through all the nights that follow. You are not in charge of tonight. You never were. That is not a failure. That is a relief. Let it be a relief. The monk Nagasena, in the conversations recorded in the Milinda Panha, once used the image of a flame passed from lamp to lamp across a great distance to describe what continues across lives. But he also used another image, one that is less often quoted but perhaps more immediately useful. He described the mind in deep meditation as being like a lamp in a windless place. Not extinguished, not struggling against anything, and simply burning steadily, giving its light evenly in all directions, not flickering because there is nothing to make it flicker. A lamp in a windless place. That is what the grove felt like tonight, what it had felt like through the whole long arc of this day, from the darkness before dawn, through the morning walk and the teachings and the long, slow descent into evening. A place where the wind had stopped, where the flame of awareness could simply burn, steadily, quietly, without drama, without effort, giving whatever light it had to give. You are in that windless place right now, not because you have achieved anything, because the night itself has become windless, because the demands have paused, because the only thing being asked of you in this moment is to be here. And you are here, you have been here. You have never really left. The rain, when it comes to the river, becomes the river. The river, when it reaches the sea, becomes the sea. The sea, when it rises into cloud, becomes the cloud. The cloud, when it falls, becomes the rain again. Nothing is lost. Everything is transformed. The water that is in your body right now has been at some point in a cloud over the ocean, in a river, in a continent you may never visit. Tears of someone whose name is completely lost to history. It has been rain and river and sea and rain again, the whole long cycling of the world's water, and now it is here, inside you, making you possible, keeping you alive. You are part of that cycling. You are not separate from it. You never were. The boundary between you and the night air, between you and the warmth of your resting place, between you and the 10,000 lives that have breathed and rested and breathed again before you. That boundary is real in some ways and in other ways is more like the surface of water, which looks like a boundary when you are above it, but which you pass through without resistance when you go into it. Go into it now. The The dark, the deep, the still, the warm, the vast. You have been walking toward it all day. It is right here. In the years after the Buddha's passing, after that final evening under the two sal trees, after the community had wept and then, slowly, steadied itself, after the great work of preservation had begun, Ananda went on a long journey. He traveled through the regions where he and the Buddha had walked together, retracing routes they had taken, stopping at places that held particular memories, sitting in groves where they had sat and teaching halls where they had taught. He was trying to do the thing he had always done. Remember, hold it all perfectly, the way only he could hold it. But he found something surprising on this journey. He found that the places themselves remembered, not metaphorically, not in the way we say the ground remembers as a kind of poetry. He found that when he sat in a place where the Buddha had sat and taught, something arose in him that did not arise anywhere else, a quality of reception, a particular stillness, as if the practice that had happened there had left some residue in the air, in the soil, in the specific arrangement of trees and light and silence. That made it easier to arrive at the same place in his own mind. You might have experienced this. Certain rooms, certain landscapes, certain arrangements of light that make it easier to be at ease. Not because of anything supernatural about them, but because of what has happened in them. Because of who you were in them, what you were doing, what quality of mind you brought to that place, and what the place gave back. A garden where you once sat quietly for an hour, a room where you have slept well before, a particular chair that seems, over time, to have absorbed something of the peace you have felt sitting in it. These places are your Jetavana, your grove, your windless lamp. A place where you are resting right now is one of them, or it is becoming one. Every night you rest here and breathe and allow the day to release you, you are adding to the residue. You are wearing a path, the way the monks' feet wore paths in the dirt of the garden, the way Faxian saw those paths 900 years later and understood immediately what they were. You are leaving in this place the memory of rest, and that memory accumulates, and the accumulation makes the next rest easier, and the rest after that easier still. This is how practice works, not through grand gestures, not through heroic effort, through repetition, through showing up night after night to do the same simple thing, to lie down, to breathe, to let the day go, to trust each time that the morning will handle the morning, to stop each time the small and exhausting work of trying to be in two places at once, in today and in tomorrow simultaneously, managing the present while also trying to secure the future. You cannot be in two places at once. No one can. What you can do, what the practice teaches, what the grove teaches, what this long night has been teaching you from the very first moment you settled in, is to be completely in the one place you are actually in. This one, right now, just this. Ananda sat in all those places. He sat in Jetavana and in the deer park at Isipatana and in the mango grove at Pava and under the great tree at Uruvela where the enlightenment had happened, and in each place he remembered. Not with effort. The memory was just there, arising naturally in the conditions that had produced it. The teaching arose in the places where it had been taught. The peace arose in the places where peace had been practiced. Not as magic, as the simple, reliable truth that we are shaped by what we repeatedly do and where we repeatedly are. You are being shaped right now by this, by this quiet, by this breath, by the choice made again tonight as it has been made before and will be made again, to stop and be still and let the world run itself for these hours. That choice is not trivial. That choice is, in its own way, the practice, the beginning and the end of it. There was a moment, late in his long teaching life, when the Buddha was asked by a king to summarize the entire teaching in a single sentence. The king was about to go into battle and did not have time for a long discourse. He wanted the essence. The Buddha looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Do good. Refrain from harm. Purify the mind. 3 things. Or perhaps 1 thing in 3 movements. Do good, which requires that you know what good is, which requires practice and attention and the gradual refinement of understanding that comes from sitting with your own mind long enough to see what it actually does as opposed to what you imagine it does. None. Refrain from harm, which requires the same depth of self-knowledge, because harm so often comes not from malice but from blindness, from the inability to see what the consequences of our actions are because we are too busy, too distracted, too caught up in our own wanting to look clearly. Purify the mind, which is the work of a lifetime or many lifetimes, but which begins here, tonight. A simple and profound act of letting the noise settle and sitting in the quiet that remains. You have been purifying the mind tonight, not in a dramatic way, in the only way that actually works. Gradually, gently, through the patient repetition of returning to stillness whenever you drift away from it. Through the practice of not fighting the drift, but simply noting it and coming back. Through the willingness, again and again, to be where you are rather than where you were or where you might be going. Ananda remembered all of it, preserved all of it, offered all of it to the generations that came after, who offered it to the generations after them, who have carried it, hand to hand, breath to breath, across 25 centuries and every continent and every form of human life, until it arrives here, in this room, in this night, in the particular quality of this moment, which is different from any moment that has come before it and will be different from any moment that comes after. This moment, yours, just this, remember it, not with effort. Let it remember itself in you the way the grove remembered itself in Ananda, naturally, without grasping, the way a deep impression remains in soft earth long after the foot that made it has moved on. The foot has moved on. The impression remains, and in the impression the path, and in the path the way home. You are almost home. You are so close now. The breath is the distance. 1 breath, 2, 3. As many as it takes, there is no hurry. Home is not going anywhere. It has never gone anywhere. It was here at the beginning of the night, and it will be here at the end of it, and it is here right now in the simple and astonishing fact of your own awareness. Resting, alive, breathing, present, home. There is a particular star. You cannot see it from where you are. It is on the other side of the sky from where you are facing. If you are facing anywhere at all in the soft geography of sleep, there is a particular star that the Buddha sometimes pointed to when teaching about the nature of time. Not because the star was special, because the star was far, so far that the light you see when you look at it left that star before there were human beings on this earth to look at it. The light traveled at the speed of light for longer than our species has existed and arrived here tonight, and if you were outside and looking up, it would enter your eye and stimulate your retina, and you would perceive it as a point of brightness in the dark. That brightness is old. Older than agriculture, older than language, older than the first creature that ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what those lights were. The star itself may no longer exist. At distances that great, what you see is always the past. You are never looking at the star as it is. You are looking at the star as it was when the light left it, which may have been before the star ran out of fuel and collapsed and became something else entirely. The past arriving as light, the present receiving it, the future somewhere that has not yet received whatever the star is sending now, assuming it is still sending anything at all. This is time, not a line from past to future, but more like a lake, perhaps, where all the different moments of the universe are present simultaneously in different places, some near, some far, some so far that the difference between near and far stops being meaningful and becomes something else that we do not have a word for. The Buddha was not a physicist. The monks at Jetavana did not have telescopes. But the teaching has always pointed, in its own way, at what the physics eventually confirmed, that the universe is not organized the way the anxious human mind wants it to be organized. with a clear past behind us and a clear future ahead of us and a manageable present in between. The universe is far stranger, far more vast, far more indifferent to our particular arrangements than that. In the strangeness, in the vastness, in the indifference, there is something that functions, if you let it, as a kind of relief. You are very small, not as an insult, as a fact that held correctly is among the most calming facts available. You are very small and the universe is very large, and what you do or don't do in the next 8 hours while you are sleeping will have exactly zero effect on the stars, the ocean tides, the rotation of the earth, the movement of the seasons. The world will proceed. The problems you are worried about will still be there, or will have resolved themselves, or will have been replaced by different problems. None of that resolving or replacing requires your conscious participation at this hour. Let the universe be large. Let yourself be small. Small is not the same as unimportant. The monk Nagasina's flame, after all, was tiny compared to the lamp, which was tiny compared to the room, which was tiny compared to the village, which was tiny compared to the world, and yet the flame gave its light completely without holding anything back, not without worrying about whether it was large enough to matter. You give your light completely. You always have. This rest you are taking right now, this giving of your exhausted body and your busy mind to the darkness, this trust that the night will do what the night does, and that the morning will come and that you will be there for it. This is complete. It is not a partial offering. It is everything you have available to give at this hour, which is the very most that is ever asked of anyone at any hour. The stars do not hurry. They burn at the rate they burn, which is determined by their mass and their fuel and the particular physics of stellar fusion. And they do not adjust that rate based on how urgently anyone needs them to be brighter or to last longer. They simply are what they are, doing what they do for as long as they do it, and then becoming something else. Be what you are for as long as you are it, which tonight is someone sleeping, someone resting, someone who has come to the end of a day and is giving themselves over to the dark the way all breathing things give themselves over to the dark. Every night without exception, without needing to understand exactly what happens in there. Something happens in there, something useful, something the waking mind cannot do and the sleeping mind does without being asked. Trust it, and trust the process that has kept you alive through every night of your life so far, that has been doing its work in the dark since before you had any idea there was work to be done. Trust the night. Trust the breath. Now, trust the body that is already, even now, beginning to do what it knows how to do. In the grove of Jetavana, the stars were doing what stars do. The monks were doing what sleeping monks do. And the trees were doing what trees do, breathing out oxygen into the dark air, their roots moving imperceptibly through the soil toward water, their bark expanding and contracting with the temperature, their 10,000 small processes continuing without the involvement of any consciousness, simply because that is what living things do when they are left alone to do it. You are a living thing, left alone to do it for these hours, and for this night, for the length of whatever sleep is coming toward you, which is already very close now, very close, the way the morning is always already on its way before the night has finished, the way the answer is always already forming before the question has quite completed itself, the way the grove of Jetavana was always already full of peace before the Buddha arrived in it, waiting for someone to notice. Notice, no, or don't notice. Either way, the peace is here. You are here. The breath is here. That is everything that has ever been needed. There is one more story from this grove, one more character whose night you have not yet heard. One more thread in the long braid of this day that is worth following to its end. Not because you need to hear it to sleep. You may already be sleeping, and if you are, this story will find its way into whatever the sleeping mind makes of words washing over it. But because this story, of all the stories from this grove, is perhaps the most useful one to carry into the dark. Sariputta had a student. The student's name was Kunda. Not the Kunda who would one day offer the Buddha his last meal. A different Kunda, a younger Kunda, a Kunda whose name appears in the text only briefly and then disappears. The way most people disappear from texts, through the simple mechanism of not being the person the compiler needed to mention in order to make the larger story work. This Kunda had come to Sariputta with a difficulty. He had been practicing, he said, for 3 years. He had been sitting every morning and every evening, had been walking mindfully, had been doing all the things one does, and nothing had happened, or nothing he could identify as the thing that was supposed to happen. He searched for the word, he felt the same, largely the same, slightly less reactive than he had been before, perhaps. Odd, slightly more capable of pausing before speaking when he wanted to say something unkind. But the great peace, the vast stillness, the luminous clarity that the senior monk sometimes described, he had not found it. He was beginning to wonder if he was doing something wrong, or if there was something wrong with him. Sariputta listened to this with the quality of attention he brought to everything, complete, without hurry, genuinely interested in what was being said rather than in what he was going to say in response. Then he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Kunda did not expect. He said, "Good." Kunda was confused. Sariputta explained. He said, "If you had told me that you had found the great peace, the vast stillness, the luminous clarity, I would have been concerned. I would have worried that you had found something that resembled those things, something your mind had produced to satisfy your expectation of what practice should feel like. The mind is very good at producing exactly what you expect to find, especially when you want very much to find it. The fact that you have not found what you expected is very good news. It means you have not been deceived by your own wanting." "And the slightly less reactive?" Sariputta asked. "The capacity to pause before the unkind word." "That," said Sariputta, "is the practice working. That is exactly what the practice looks like from the inside. Not a dramatic transformation, not a flood of light, a slight, daily, barely perceptible loosening of the grip, a tiny increase in the gap between impulse and action, and a fractional improvement in the capacity to notice what is happening before you are already in the middle of it. That is it. That is the whole thing. Accumulated over years, it becomes something unrecognizable from the outside and unmistakable from the inside. But it is always made of the same material, tiny, daily, nearly invisible." Kunda sat with this for a long time. Then he asked, "And when does it get easier?" Sariputta smiled. "It already has," he said. "You just don't know it yet because you are comparing where you are to where you think you should be, rather than to where you were. Compare it to where you were 3 years ago, not where you imagined you would be. You can do this right now if you want to. Compare your current relationship to rest, to this particular act of lying down in the dark and breathing and letting go, to what it was some years ago. Are you more capable of it? Even slightly, even fractionally? If you are, that is the practice working. That is the path under your feet, even when you cannot see it, even when you are not sure you are on it. You are on it. You have been on it. Every night you have done this. Every night you have lain down and breathed and given yourself over to the dark and woken up the next morning. You have been practicing, without trying, without even knowing. The body knows, night knows, the breath knows." Kunda went away reassured, not because the difficulty had been removed, because it had been placed in a context that made it bearable, because the very absence of the dramatic transformation he had been looking for had been reframed gently as evidence that he was doing it right. Your very ordinary night is evidence that you are doing it right. Your unremarkable night, just a person's sleeping night, with no great revelations and no celestial lights and no sense of having broken through to somewhere previously inaccessible. This night is the practice. This breath is the practice. This release of the day's grip is the practice. And it is enough. It has always been enough. The practice has been working in you this whole time, so quietly and so incrementally that you have not noticed. The way you do not notice the growth of a tree until one day you look at it and realize it is enormous. It must have been growing all along. Where were you when this was happening? You were here, living your life, breathing, sleeping, waking, breathing again. The tree was growing the whole time. Sleep is growing in you now. Not a metaphor. The neurological and physiological processes of sleep onset are literally happening in your brain and body right now. The temperature dropping, the melatonin rising, a transition from waking consciousness into the first stage of sleep happening in waves, each wave pulling you a little further from the shore. You do not need to help. You do not need to do anything except not fight it. Simply stop fighting it. Simply let the waves do what waves do, which is pull you out to the place where the water is deep enough to float in without touching the bottom. Float. Just float. The water will hold you. It always has. Always will. The grove holds Kunda. The night holds Sariputta. The teaching holds all of it, and the teaching is held in turn by everyone who has ever received it and passed it on, all the way down to this moment, this voice, this breath, yours and mine and the Buddha's in the grove of Jetavana 25 centuries ago, all the same breath, all the same dark, all the same quiet offering of the day to the night. Give it. It is already given. Rest. There is one more watch. The third watch of the night, the one that comes after the deep, after the middle dark, after the second watch where Kumara's thoughts settled and the coals went gray and Nagasena lay down and Kunda was reassured and the stars made their slow rotation. The third watch is not quite night anymore. On. It is the hour that does not have a good name in English. The hour between 1 and 4 in the morning when the world is at its most itself. Most free of the human imposition of meaning and purpose and schedule, most simply the world going about its own business without reference to any of us. The Buddha was awake in the third watch. He was almost always awake in the third watch, not because sleep had abandoned him. He rested in ways that the tradition describes, but that modern language does not have good categories for. States that were not quite sleep and not quite wakefulness, but contained the restorative quality of both without the limitation of either. In the third watch, in this deep, dark pre-dawn hour, he sometimes did what the texts describe as ranging over the world with the eye of wisdom, which sounds mystical and perhaps is, but which might also be understood simply as this: sitting in the dark with a very quiet mind, paying attention. What do you pay attention to when the mind is very quiet? Not to thought. Thought, in that quality of stillness, tends to arise and pass without much traction, like clouds moving through a clear sky. Not to the body. The body at this hour, in this depth of quiet, tends to fall below the threshold of ordinary perception, its signals too faint to disturb. What you pay attention to in the deepest quiet is something harder to name. A quality of awareness itself, the fact of being here, the bare minimal, entirely sufficient fact of presence, not presence of anything in particular, just presence, not just the being here-ness of being here. The Zen tradition, which grew from the seeds the Buddha planted and which developed in China and Japan over centuries of transmission, has a koan, a question without a logical answer, designed to push the thinking mind to its edge and beyond, that asks, what was your original face before your parents were born? It is not a question about genetics or history. It is a question about this, a quality of pure awareness before any content arises in it, before the thoughts, before the identity, before the plans and the fears and the memories, before all the things that make you specifically you, as opposed to the universe simply being aware of itself through the particular temporary window of your existence, your original face. Not lost, not far away. Present in every breath, in every moment of genuine stillness, whenever the noise quiets down enough to notice it. You might be closer to it right now than you have been at any point in this entire day. Not because you have done anything remarkable, and because the night has done it for you, has stripped away, layer by layer, the usual noise, until what remains is something closer to the beginning, something simpler, something that was here before the day began and will be here after it ends and is here now, in the quiet, holding you the way the grove holds the sleeping monks, without effort, without condition, not without asking you to be anything other than what you already are. In this third watch quiet, the Buddha's breathing was the same as the breathing of the trees, was the same as the breathing of the river in its banks, not 5 miles to the east, was the same in some sense as the breathing of the earth itself, the great slow exchange of gases between the surface and the atmosphere, the world breathing in and out on geological timescales, patient beyond any patience the human mind can sustain, regular beyond any regularity the human mind can maintain. You are breathing with all of it. Right now, your exhale joining the exhalation of the grove, the forest, a continent, the world. Your inhale receiving what the living world has made available, this oxygen, this moment, this particular composition of air in this particular place at this particular hour, which will never be this exact composition again. You are always breathing something that has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly this form. That is not a reason for anxiety. It is a reason for, what is the word, wonder, perhaps, or appreciation, or the specific quality of attention that arises when you understand that what you are receiving right now is genuinely irreplaceable and genuinely sufficient, not lacking anything, not needing to be augmented or improved, just this breath, just this dark, just this moment of being alive in the world, which is the only thing that any creature has ever had or will ever have, and which, when you are inside it completely, turns out to be, against all expectation, enough, more than enough. The third watch continued. The grove breathed, the monks breathed, the trees breathed, the river breathed. The stars burned their ancient light across the distance, and some of it arrived here, and even in the dark beneath the canopy where no star was visible. The starlight present in the darkness the way warmth is present in a room even after the fire has gone out, stored in the walls, in the floor, the thermal mass of everything that has absorbed it. You have absorbed warmth today. You have absorbed the warmth of this story, of this company, of this long walk through a day in the life of a community that spent 25 centuries learning how to be exactly where it was. That warmth is in you now. It will be in you when you wake. It will be in you when you have forgotten, as you will forget, most of the specific content of this night. The names, the teachings, the particular quality of the light in the rose apple shade. And the warmth does not require the memory. The warmth outlasts the words. You are warm, you are held, you are somewhere in the long middle of a night that knows what it is doing and is doing it perfectly. You have nothing to add. You have nothing to protect. You have nothing to manage or monitor or maintain. Just breathe, just this. The grove of Jetavana at this hour was so quiet that you could hear individual leaves move when the faintest breath of air found its way through the canopy. Not wind. Nothing as vigorous as wind, just the minimal, almost hypothetical movement of air that happens at the very bottom of a still night, when the temperature differential between the soil and the air above it creates the gentlest possible circulation, a breath so faint it barely registers as movement at all. Ananda felt it on his face. He was the only one still awake in the outer grove, the only one still sitting in anything like a formal posture of attention. The others had given themselves over to sleep, or to the states that resemble sleep, or to the states that resemble wakefulness. The distinctions blur at this hour, ways that make the distinction seem less important than they did at noon. Ananda sat and felt the faint movement of air on his face and did not think anything in particular about it. It was air, it was moving, he was here, that was all. That was in this moment everything there was to know. He had been with the Buddha for more years than he could easily count. Decades of walking and sitting and listening and remembering. Decades of early mornings and teaching sessions and quiet evenings and the particular quality of waiting that is not impatience but pure open readiness. He had received more teaching than almost anyone alive. He had memorized vast stretches of it, held it in the extraordinary container of his mind with perfect fidelity. He knew the words, he knew the context, he knew the stories behind the teachings and the stories behind the stories. And yet, in this quiet at this hour, what he felt was not knowledge. It was not the satisfaction of someone who has mastered a subject. It was something simpler and stranger than that. It was the feeling of having been through all these years of walking and sitting and listening, slowly, patiently, incrementally emptied of the need to be anywhere other than here, not emptied of caring. He still cared deeply about the people in the grove around him, about the teaching, about the world outside the grove, and the people in it who were suffering and who might benefit from what he had received. He cared about all of that. But the caring had become something different from the grasping it had resembled in his youth. When he first began following the Buddha, when the eagerness to learn and to understand had a slightly frantic quality, a slight desperation in it, a slight sense that if he did not hold on very tightly, he might lose what he was trying to keep. The grip had eased. Over decades, the grip had eased. Not loosened to the point of letting go, which would be another kind of grasping. The grasping for detachment, which is still grasping. Just eased, relaxed, become appropriate to what was actually required rather than amplified by the fear of loss. This is what the years do when the years are used well. Not the dramatic transformation, the gradual easing, the slow relaxation of the grip, the day by day, breath by breath reduction in the distance between where you are and where you think you need to be. You are already closer than you know. The gap that seems so wide between the ordinary you and the peaceful you, between the anxious you and the resting you, between the you who lies awake at night reviewing the day and the you who lies in the dark simply breathing. That gap is smaller than it appears. It is made of breath. It closes with breath. It is closing right now with this breath and the next one and the one after that. Ananda felt the faint air on his face. Heard at the very edge of audibility the first stirring of the bird that would, in an hour or so, begin its pre-dawn song. Not yet, but the preparation was already underway. The day was already somewhere beyond the eastern horizon composing itself. The sun was already beginning the business of rising, which takes longer than you think. The sky begins to lighten an hour before the sun appears. The darkness begins to thin almost imperceptibly long before anyone would call it dawn. The day is coming, but the night is not yet done. In the time remaining, in whatever time remains between where you are and where the morning finds you, there is nothing required of you except this: to be here, to breathe, to let the night finish its work in you. And the way the river finishes its work in the stone, slowly, gently, over more time than the stone can measure, wearing away what is not essential, leaving what is. What is essential in you is very simple. It has always been simple. Beneath the plans and the worries and the identities and the roles and the names other people use for you and the names you use for yourself, beneath all of that, there is something that has been present since before any of it began. Something that does not need to be defended or explained or improved. Something that is simply here, the way awareness is simply here, the way the darkness is simply here, the way the breath is simply here. That is you, the essential you, the one who has been with you through every night of your life, who will be with you through every night to come, who does not require the day's accomplishments in order to deserve the night's rest. You deserve the night's rest. You always have, you always will. Not because of what you have done, because of what you are now. Because you are a breathing thing in a world that breathes, and breathing things need rest, and rest is not a luxury, and you are not too busy for it. And the work will wait, and the morning will come, and whatever needs to be handled will be handled. And right now, in this moment, the only thing that is being asked of you is to be exactly where you are. You are exactly where you are. The grove of Jetavana is around you. The monks are sleeping. The Buddha is breathing. Ananda is watching the last of the night with the quality of attention that has no object, not watching for anything in particular, simply watching, simply present, the way the sky is present, the way the dark is present. The way everything that exists is present simply by virtue of existing. You exist. Simply by virtue of existing, you are enough. The faint air moved through the canopy. The leaves barely trembled. The bird stirred once in its sleep and was still. And the night, the long, generous, unhurried, completely sufficient night, continued to do what nights do, which is to hold you, on, which is simply and always to hold you. Sleep well, you have walked so far, you have come so far. The grove is behind you and the morning is ahead of you, and right now, exactly here, in the space between them, you are safe, you are held, you are home. Breathe in, breathe out, and rest. There is a quality of the pre-dawn dark that is different from any other darkness. If you have ever been awake at this hour, truly awake, not woken by alarm or emergency, but simply present, sitting or lying in the last moments before the world remembers itself, you will recognize it without needing a description. But perhaps you are close to sleep right now, and perhaps this hour is reaching you as a sound washing over the edge of consciousness rather than a sentence you are reading. And if so, let this description find whatever part of you is still listening. Pre-dawn dark is a darkness that has earned itself. It has lasted through the whole night, through the first darkness of early evening that still carries the smell of the day, through the middle darkness where the temperature bottoms out and the silence deepens, through the third watch where everything that can be set down has been set down, and what remains is only the most essential. No, pre-dawn dark is what is left when everything unnecessary has been removed. It is the darkness that remains when nothing else remains, and it has a weight to it, not the weight of heaviness, not the weight of stone or grief or the specific gravity of something that needs to be carried, the weight of nothing, the particular, specific, almost physical presence of complete absence of demand. The world, at this hour, asks nothing of you, not even wakefulness. The dark itself has lowered its expectations to zero, which is to say, it expects you to breathe. That is the entire requirement. Just breathe, just exist, just be the breathing thing you are in the dark until the dark becomes something else. In the grove of Jetavana, in this last hour before the birds began, the air itself seemed to have taken on this quality, this weight of nothing, this dense, nourishing, unhurried absence of any agenda. The trees were trees, the soil was soil. The water in the underground spring moved through its dark channels with the same indifference to whether anyone noticed as it had always moved, as it would always move, long after the grove was gone, and the teaching had taken other forms, and the world had changed in ways no one sleeping in this grove tonight could have imagined. The world has always changed in ways no one sleeping could have imagined, and the sleep went on anyway, and the world went on anyway, and the morning came, each time, to people who had rested and people who had not rested, to people who had figured everything out, and people who had figured out nothing, to people who deserved the morning, and people who were uncertain whether they did. The morning comes without preference. Like the dark, like the rain, like the river, it comes to all of it, all of you, without condition, without evaluation. It comes because that is what mornings do, and it will come to you, this particular morning that is already forming somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, already sending its first imperceptible signals of approach into the darkness. It will come to you in the same way, unconditionally, without asking what you accomplished yesterday, or whether you resolved what you were trying to resolve, or whether the sleep you are taking was deep enough, or long enough, or peaceful enough. The morning will come, and when it comes, you will be in it. Ready or not, rested or restless, certain or uncertain, you will be in it. Breathing, present, alive, the same essential you that lay down in the dark and gave the night what the night needed and received in return what only the night can give. That exchange, the giving of the day to the night, the receiving of the night's restoration, is one of the most fundamental transactions of a human life. It happens every night. It has happened every night of your existence. And each time it has worked, which is to say, each time you have laid down and breathed and eventually slept and eventually woken, the exchange has been completed. The night has held its end. The morning has arrived. Trust it to happen again tonight, and Trust the dark the way you trust the chair you are sitting in, not because you have checked its structural integrity, but because it has held you every time before and you have simply learned, through repetition, that it holds. Night holds, the breath holds, the body, doing what bodies do in the dark, holds. You are held, right now, completely. Let the weight of nothing settle over you. That specific, particular, exactly sufficient weight of having no requirement to be anything at all except present and breathing. Let it settle the way a blanket settles, the way warmth settles, the way the dark settles at the end of a long evening when the last lamp is extinguished and the room becomes what it was before anyone made it anything else. Just this, just the dark and the breath and the weight of nothing and the faint, barely there sound of the night at its most itself. Before the birds, before the day, before the world starts wanting things again, just this. And in the grove of Jetavana, Ananda finally closed his eyes. Not because he was tired, exactly, because the night had reached its completion. Because there was nothing left to watch for. Not because the practice of keeping watch and the practice of resting had, in this last hour, become the same practice. Both of them simply a quality of open, unhurried, undemanding presence, available for whatever the moment required, asking nothing in return. He closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. The grove held him the way the grove had held everyone in it all night, without distinction and without effort, simply by being what it was, a place of shade and silence and the faint, persistent smell of wet earth and night-blooming flowers, and the accumulated years of a community that had, each in their own imperfect and devoted way, been trying to do the same thing you are trying to do right now, to be here, completely here. With nothing held back and nothing demanded and nothing left undone that could not wait until morning. Everything that needed to happen tonight has happened. The teaching was given. The meal was shared. The fire burned and cooled. The stars moved their arc. The monks slept and breathed, and one of them could not be still and came back to stillness anyway. And one of them carried a doubt that settled like sediment, and one of them was young and didn't know yet what he was building, which was exactly right, because no one knows what they are building while they are building it, and the not knowing is not an obstacle, it is the condition. The condition of every life, the condition of every night, the condition of every breath that moves into an unknown moment and trusts, without evidence that the moment will receive it. The moment receives it. Always, the breath always finds the moment. The night always finds the morning. The river always finds the sea. You always find your way home. Tonight is that finding. This breath is that finding. This darkness, this warmth, this weight of nothing that is also the weight of everything that has been released. This is home. You are already there. You have always been there. Sleep. One last thing. One small, quiet, final thing before the words stop altogether and leave you to the silence they have been preparing you for. In the grove of Jetavana, in the last moments of the last watch of the night, just before the first bird gathers itself to sing, there is a quality of stillness so complete that it is almost audible. The silence before the sound, the dark before the light, the held breath of the world before it exhales into another day. You are in that held breath right now. Stay in it as long as you need to. The bird will sing when it sings. The light will come when it comes. The day will arrive with its full inventory of requirements and possibilities and things that need your attention and people who need your presence and a world that will go on being itself regardless of whether you have slept or not. Oh, it is better. Kinder to yourself and to everyone you will encounter if you have. So sleep fully, without reservation, without the small, persistent part of the mind that sometimes insists on keeping one eye open, one hand on the door, one foot outside the rest, just in case. Let that part go just for tonight. just for these remaining hours. None. Just for the time it takes to breathe in and breathe out and breathe in and breathe out until the breathing becomes the only thing and the only thing becomes everything and everything becomes the silence it always already was. A Buddha breathes in the grove. Ananda rests at last. The monks sleep under the trees and on their mats and in their small dwellings. The fire is cool. The lake holds the last stars. The path through the grove is empty of footsteps, waiting for morning to bring them back. And you who have walked this whole long day, this whole long night, this whole long path from darkness to darkness and back again, you are exactly where you need to be. Here, this now. Rest. Be held. Good night. And yet the night is not quite finished with you. There is still a little more dark, a little more silence, a little more of this particular quality of held, unhurried, weightless presence that the grove has been offering all night and will offer until the last possible moment, when the first bird finally decides the dark has lasted long enough and opens its throat and lets the song come through. The song will come. It always comes, in every latitude, in every season, every climate where there are birds and there is night. The song comes. Before any clock, before any alarm, before any human institution of timekeeping decided when the morning officially begins, the birds decided, and they decided based on something older than institution. The first imperceptible brightening of the sky in the east, the shift from absolute darkness to something that is still dark but is, technically, slightly less dark than it was 5 minutes ago. A shift so small that human eyes cannot detect it without instruments. But the birds detect it, and they respond. The birds in the grove of Jetavana were beginning that internal preparation now. Not the song yet, not the sound, but the readying of the instrument. The throat, the syrinx, the specific muscles that would produce the specific calls that had been produced by the ancestors of these specific birds. For longer than the grove had existed, the preparation was happening in the dark, in the sleep of the birds, in whatever a bird's sleeping body does to ready itself for the enormous daily task of announcing the morning to everyone within hearing. You are within hearing, or you will be, when the song comes. And when it comes, if you are still awake, if the sleep has not yet fully taken you, let it arrive not as an interruption but as a completion. The birds are the grove's last word on the subject of this night. Their song is not the beginning of the day, it is the closing of the night, the final benediction, the signature at the bottom of something that has been written in the dark and the quiet and the breath and the accumulated presence of a community of practitioners. Across the whole long arc of these hours, the night has written something in you, not in words. Nothing as specific as words. In the quality of your breathing, in the looseness of your shoulders, if they have loosened, the way the thinking has slowed and the watching has slowed and the managing has slowed until what remains is something closer to the original than the day self usually manages to be. Something quieter, something that has always been there beneath the planning and the worrying and the doing, waiting patiently for the quiet that would allow it to surface. It has surfaced tonight, or it is surfacing now, or it is at the very edge of surfacing, and the last thing required is the last letting go. The final small release of whatever is still being held, whatever last filament of wakefulness is still connecting you to the surface, still insisting very softly that you maintain some minimal level of vigilance against the possibility that something might require your attention. Nothing requires your attention. Not right now, not in this grove, in this dark, this breath. You have given your attention generously and well throughout this long day, and it is time. It has been time for a while now, to let the attention rest too, not to switch it off, not to abandon it. Simply to let it drift, the way boats drift from their moorings in a gentle current. Still the boat, still yours, still there when you need it, but no longer tethered so tightly to the dock that it cannot move. Drift. Let the attention drift. Let the thoughts drift with it. Let the sounds drift. Let the words of this story drift into the texture of the night air, becoming part of the grove, becoming part of the dark, becoming part of the breathing that continues regardless. Yours and the monks and the trees and the night's own breathing, all of it one breath, all of it one long, slow, sufficient inhalation and exhalation of a world that has been breathing longer than any of us and will breathe long after. The grove breathes you. You breathe the grove. The night holds both. The morning is already there, just behind the dark, patient as water, ready as always, waiting for nothing more than the sun's slow arrival at the edge of the world. It is coming, but not yet. Not yet, for now. This, the last of the dark, the weight of nothing, the breath that has been your companion since before you knew what a companion was. In, out, in. The bird stirs, not yet singing, not yet, but almost, almost. Sleep now, sleep before the song. Sleep into the last perfect silence of this long, complete, utterly sufficient night. The grove holds you, the breath holds you, the dark holds you. Sleep.